visit us. Robert once said his mom doesn't want to interfere in our marriage, which is why she doesn't come over, even though we're close. I appreciated that about her, as many women worry about meddling mothers-in-law. But since I didn't have to worry, I felt relaxed about my family relationships. After a few years of work, we started talking about buying a house. During this time, my parents heard our plans and made us a generous offer. They said if we wanted to build a house, we could use some of their land. My parents aren't wealthy, but they had good land to give us thanks to my grandfather. He told them to pass it on to us so we could do whatever we wanted. When I told Robert about this, he was excited. He said we should take advantage of their offer and that he would be very grateful. So we began discussing what kind of house we wanted. We visited showrooms, checked out our boss's big mansion, and talked to real estate agents about new houses. Planning was fun. But one day, everything changed when Robert got a call from his mom. She somehow found out about our plans to build a new house and suggested we build a duplex so she could live with us. We were both shocked. We had never thought my mother-in-law would want to live so close to us. After a moment of silence, Robert gave a vague answer and tried to avoid the topic. This was understandable, since we hadn't planned on a duplex. We were hoping for a room for a future child, and if we made it a duplex, we would have to rethink everything. I worried that if we said no, it would hurt our relationship with my mother-in-law. We promised to have dinner at her place once a month, so we went to dinner. My mother-in-law brought up the duplex idea again. She asked if we had thought more about it and said she believed it was a good plan. She mentioned that they would help financially, and selling our apartment could give us a good amount of money. Plus, she said it would be convenient for when we have kids, because she could help us out. She quickly started listing the benefits of living in a duplex. I tried to speak up, but she kept going. While she had some good points, like getting help when we have a baby and the financial support, I felt that Robert and I could handle any challenges on our own. I thought it was better to rely on my own parents than risk being bullied by my mother-in-law. When she saw my worried face, she said, "Is it really that bad living with us? I thought you didn't hate us." She sounded sad, so I pretended not to hear her and quickly left her house. After that, she kept telling Robert every day about the duplex idea, which was starting to stress me out. I asked Robert what he wanted to do. Living together with our parents might be nice, but I didn't want to lose our alone time either. After thinking it over, we decided to say no to my mother-in-law's offer. We wanted to focus on our own time together, and we believed she would understand if we explained it well. When the day of our monthly family dinner came, we went to my mother-in-law's house to share our decision. But as we started to talk, she interrupted us. "Oh, about the duplex, we're moving forward with the plan." "What?" Before we could react, she added, "Mark is moving in too. He's a single dad, and it's tough for him. Let's help him out. Plus, it will be good practice for when you have your own kids, right?" We were so shocked by her words that we forgot what we had come to say. My mother-in-law took our silence as agreement and began planning the duplex, including ideas from my father-in-law and brother-in-law. We tried to tell our in-laws our decision several times, but they kept saying, "We're busy right now. Let's talk later." Meanwhile, the plans for the duplex moved ahead. Our in-laws were covering the construction costs, so we didn't have a big financial burden, but we were still going to live with them and my brother-in-law, who would need help with his child. Just thinking about it made me feel sad. Robert was no help either. He had given up and said, "There's nothing we can do to stop it now. Let's just give up." I also felt it was pointless to fight against the situation. We finalized the blueprint for the duplex and started choosing things like tiles and flooring. At this point, we should have secured the funds for the house, but the money my in-laws promised was missing. Robert called his mother to ask about the money, but she said something had come up and needed money right away. She asked if we could cover it and promised to pay us back in a month. We felt frustrated because even though they couldn't pay now, their project was already moving forward, and we couldn't cancel it. Robert and I could barely afford it ourselves, but we didn't think we should have to. We were angry at my in-laws for being so selfish. "You act like it's just a small amount. Robert yelled at his mother. She promised to pay it back in a month. Has she ever lied to you? Suddenly, my brother-in-law interrupted. Hearing this made Robert agree to wait for the money and start waiting for his mother's transfer. I decided to talk to my parents about it. The next day, I went to my parents' house and explained what was happening. I wondered if we could put the plans on hold. They said, we were going to give you that land anyway, so if they promise to pay later, we'll cover the costs. Really? Are you sure? I asked. Of course, dear. Your happiness is what matters to us. Don't give up on your dream house for the sake of your future children. Don't let this multi-family plan happen, they said. I was so grateful I almost cried. My mom smiled and added, plus, if they're always around, it'll be hard for me to visit. I want all the grandkids to myself. With my parents' help, the construction went ahead as planned, and finally, our dream home was finished. But a month later, we still hadn't received any money from my mother-in-law. Meanwhile, she started moving her things in before we could. It was strange, a duplex with no room for us. Since they didn't send the money, we didn't build a separate room for her, but she began moving her stuff into the room we had planned for our future children. To make matters worse, she invited her friends over for a housewarming party and started showing them around the house. It's our dream duplex. It's a bit small, but we have a wonderful garden. We can even plant a vegetable garden, and once the veggies are ready, I'll share some with you, my mother-in-law said, as if they had built the house with their own money. Her friends, not knowing the situation, complimented the house before leaving. After they moved in and things settled down, 2 months passed, and we still hadn't received any money from my in-laws. Robert confronted them, but they kept saying, soon, very soon. However, 3 months and even half a year went by, and nothing changed. Then one day, my mother-in-law announced, we decided not to sell our house. Instead, we'll have Mark and his kids live there, clearly stating she wouldn't pay us anything. I wasn't surprised, though. Robert and I often talked about how she probably never intended to pay. Oh, I just noticed the house feels cramped when you both are living there. Can you move out? I have friends who sometimes want to stay over, and I want to be able to use the place freely. Doesn't that sound good? She asked. Robert raised his voice slightly and said, that's not the deal. Why should we leave our own house? She replied, well, both of you are working and hardly ever at home, and since you don't have any kids, it shouldn't be a problem. Besides, Lisa's family is rich, right? You can afford to build a new house. I was shocked by her outrageous words, and Robert felt the same way. First of all, you haven't paid any of the expenses like you promised. If you're not selling the house, then you never intended to pay from the start, right? What can I do? I decided to let Mark, who's a single father, live there. What's wrong with giving a house to my own son and his kids? She snapped, getting more irritated. It seemed unlikely things would improve, so Robert and I decided to talk about it in our bedroom that night. If this keeps going on, my mother and her family will definitely try to kick us out and take over the house. I said, yeah, I suppose so, Robert replied. From the next day on, my mother-in-law continued her attacks, making nasty comments and harassing me. If you don't want to be bullied as a daughter-in-law, you better move out quickly. I thought I wouldn't have to deal with mother-in-law and daughter-in-law problems, but experiencing them firsthand turned out to be more troublesome than I imagined. When we were living in that small room, we barely interacted with my mother-in-law. Maybe it was foolish of me not to see how things would turn out. However, since I believe in giving back as good as I get, I decided to make a plan. A month later, my husband, his parents, his grandfather, and I came up with a plan. My husband told my mother-in-law, we're moving out. You can invite your friends over whenever you want. You'll be happier that way. The moment she heard this, her face lit up with joy. We decided to move to a newly built apartment we had been looking at, which reminded us of our newlywed days. We returned to renting, and it felt peaceful, just like when we were first married. A week later, the phone rang. I overheard my husband say, I see, that's great. Bye. I was sure our plan had worked. The day after we made our plan with my parents and grandfather, we put our house up for sale and found a buyer who wanted us to move out in 3 weeks. While my mother-in-law was away, we let acquaintances and colleagues come to see the house. Today's phone call was about the family who decided to buy it. We arranged for 2 large trucks and had the movers quickly load our belongings and furniture. We carefully timed everything for when my in-laws said they were going to a theme park in New York over the weekend with their grandsons. They mentioned they would stay overnight, which was our chance. Everything went smoothly. The professional movers packed for us, and it was done much faster than we expected. We waited in front of the house for my in-laws to return. When they arrived in the evening, they seemed tense, sensing something was off. My mother-in-law, looking anxious, entered the house and screamed, "What is this? What happened? Where are all our things?" My father-in-law was also making a fuss. Robert and I calmly watched them from outside, and when they came out, we revealed the truth. Robert said, "Everything is loaded on these trucks. The destination is noted on a piece of paper stuck to the trucks, so please go there. It might be a bit small, but it's enough for the 2 of you to live in. It might get cramped if you invite friends over. Also, this house has already been sold. It's someone else's property now. Take care." My in-laws were shocked. "What do you mean you put it up for sale? It was our house. You can't just sell our house." I responded, "The property is in Lisa's parents' name, but the house is in our name. We are the owners, so we have the right to sell it. You should be ashamed to call it your house when you haven't paid a single dollar for it." Robert's unexpected words made my in-laws fall silent. Before we left, he said, "We've taken care of things until now, but you'll have to unload everything yourselves. You can afford that, can't you?" They replied, "We don't have that kind of money." Robert continued, "I know you must have some money. You've been selling things you took from Lisa and depositing the money in your bank account." "How did you know that?" they asked. "Does it matter?" "Oh, and you don't have to pay us back. Consider it severance pay. Use it however you like. Now we'll be off. I doubt we'll meet again." With that, Robert declared severance to his parents, took my hand, and we hurried home. We called our parents and grandparents to share the news of our successful plan, and they were very happy for us. My grandfather, knowing we were going to live in an apartment, said, "Actually, I still have some land left. I'll give it to you too, and I'll cover half the cost so you can build a new house." And that's exactly what we did. Half a year later, we completed our dream of building a brand new single-family home. It was a bit farther from the city center, but the air was fresh, the neighbors were kind, and we were very happy. As for my in-laws, we didn't know if they went to the address we provided. They contacted my parents for financial help and asked Robert's brother, who was planning to remarry next year, if they could live with him. He flatly refused because his new wife also wanted to move in. My parents decisively turned them down and told them not to involve our family anymore. Robert apologized to my parents for his terrible parents, but they said, "From now on, we're your real parents. Feel free to rely on us as much as you want." Thinking about future problems, my parents recommended we install a home security system. We could rest easy knowing they would turn away Robert's parents if they ever showed up. We also got a small, cute puppy as a guard dog in our yard, and I highly doubted his parents would have the guts to intrude. From now on, we wouldn't have to deal with Robert's parents at all. It was the beginning of a new life for the 2 of us. We planned to have children in a few years and build a happy family. We promised each other we wouldn't let anyone disturb our happiness.
I couldn't help but smile from ear to ear as my daughter-in-law, Melissa, and grandson, Eric, came to visit me in the hospital after I had fallen ill. After exchanging greetings, I tilted my head in confusion at Melissa's gloomy expression and the fact that she didn't bring the novel I had asked for during the visit. While averting her eyes unnaturally, Melissa seemed to muster up the courage to tell me something as she opened her mouth to speak. However, just as she was about to say something, Eric energetically leaped onto my hospital bed with his small body.
"Granny, will you get better after the surgery?"
"Huh? Oh, it's really not a big deal. I guess I was just a little tired." Seeing your face, Eric, has completely rejuvenated me. As I smiled and made a gesture as if flexing my biceps, Eric, who saw this, also grinned happily. He peered into my face for a while and suddenly fell silent. I continued to smile while being gazed at by my grandson's beautiful eyes, which seemed to be deep in thought about something. "Hey, Granny. Do adults laugh when they're lonely?"
"What? Why do you ask?"
As I tried to ask him for his reason, Melissa hurriedly took out her wallet from her bag. She gently lowered Eric from my bed, handed him some change, and said, "Go buy yourself some juice," sending him out of the hospital room. Then, with a serious look on her face, she came close to my side and began to recount the event she had just witnessed. "My name is Allison. My husband, Robert, and I are both in our 50s, and we are known by ourselves and others as a loving couple who have never had a fight since we were young. I am a self-proclaimed freelance writer who writes travel-related articles. For some reason, I have always admired the sound of the title freelance writer, so I search for work online, accept assignments, and am now passionately weaving my words. Robert works for an online gaming company, handling tasks such as system construction, but his job is very demanding, and it is not uncommon for him to stay overnight at the company when a deadline is approaching. Our son and his wife live in the neighborhood, and we have a very good relationship with them. Our son William and his wife Melissa often invite us on overnight trips and plan other activities. When our grandson Eric says things like,
I have fun when I'm with Grandpa and Granny,
I can't help but smile. However, Robert always declines invitations from our son and his wife, saying he is too busy with work, which is very disappointing for both him and me. Although Robert and I have a married life where we rarely have the opportunity to sit at the dinner table together, I am deeply grateful to my husband for working late into the night for our family. While my husband works diligently from early morning to late at night, I am not bound by time and freely pursue my freelance writing. When I have spare time, I feel really guilty about going on leisure trips with my son and his wife. Perhaps sensing my feelings, Robert always smiles with deep wrinkles etched on his face, as if a grin is carved into it. My work is like a hobby to me. You don't need to worry about it, Robert assured me with a smile.
Yeah. Thank you, always, I replied gratefully.
So, where are you traveling to next? He asked, curiosity piqued.
Well, next is a tourist spot that has recently seen an increase in visitors. I began to explain.
Robert listened to my conversation with a smile, nodding and interjecting appropriately. Occasionally, he would widen his eyes in surprise or nod deeply as if impressed, demonstrating his excellent listening skills.
Wouldn't it be a great honor if someone read my travel article and visited the places I recommended? I spoke passionately.
Whenever I talked with such enthusiasm, Robert's cheeks would relax into a happy expression. One day, while I was writing an article on my computer in my room, my fingers suddenly stopped touching the keyboard. I felt like I was making more mistakes than usual. My body felt feverish, as if the air conditioner's temperature setting was too high, and I continued writing the article while taking deep breaths, but eventually, my fingers came to a halt. From past experience, I knew I had a fever. I reread the text on the computer screen and let out a big sigh. I had a deadline for the requested article, and I couldn't just sleep because I had a fever. I forced myself to finish writing the article, but as soon as I was done, my body felt heavy, and I collapsed from the chair. Apparently, I had lost consciousness for a while. My son's family, who had come to share some dinner, found it suspicious when I didn't answer the doorbell. Melissa, who had previously been given a spare key, had the presence of mind to enter the house and found me collapsed on the floor. Then, my son and his wife took me to the hospital. It seemed that overexerting myself while having a fever had taken its toll, and I was diagnosed with transient fatigue. I also had a strong headache, so on the doctor's recommendation, I was admitted to the hospital for about 3 days. When I contacted Robert, he said he had finished work and returned home, but he was worried when he couldn't find me. He promptly brought me 3 days' worth of clothes. Robert bowed his head, his voice filled with sincere apologies. He said that he was busy with work now and wouldn't be able to visit the hospital until the day I was discharged. It couldn't be helped if it was for work. With a smile, "Don't worry about it," I told him. The day after I was hospitalized, my fever had gone down, and I was feeling much better. Sitting on the clean hospital bed, I restlessly looked up at the ceiling and opened the drawers of the TV stand. It should be fine to take a little walk, right? I convinced myself. I took a stroll around the hospital and sat down on a small chair in an area with an adjoining shop and restaurant. I'm so bored. I noticed a man sitting a short distance away, reading a book while placing an A4 stand beside him. Oh, come to think of it, I had an unfinished novel at home. William is probably not at home due to work, so should I call Melissa and ask her to bring the novel from my house? I gave her a spare key, and it's easy to explain where the book I was reading is located. I called Melissa from the public phone installed in the hospital, and she readily agreed. Then, I returned to my hospital room and started reading a picture book that was placed in the ward. It was a book called Where's Waldo? I casually opened the first page and seriously searched for Waldo, only to realize that 2 hours had passed. Melissa came to visit me, and I looked up from the picture book. Feeling a strange sense of guilt, as if I had wasted my time in the most unproductive way possible in my life, I put the picture book back and smiled at Melissa and Eric. "Thank you for going out of your way, Melissa." After greeting her, I tilted my head in puzzlement at her gloomy expression and the fact that she didn't have the novel I had requested. While averting her eyes unnaturally, Melissa eventually seemed to muster up the courage to tell me something as she opened her mouth to speak. However, just as she was about to say something, my grandson Eric energetically leaped onto my bed with his small body.
Granny, will you get better after the surgery?
Huh? Oh, it's really not a big deal. I guess I was just a little tired. Seeing your face, Eric, has completely rejuvenated me. As I smiled and made a gesture as if flexing my biceps, Eric, who saw this, also grinned happily. He peered into my face for a while and suddenly fell silent. I continued to smile while being gazed at by my grandson's beautiful eyes, which seemed to be deep in thought about something. "Hey, Granny. Do adults laugh when they're lonely?"
What? Why do you ask?
Because, when I went to Grandpa's house earlier, Grandpa was having a party with an unfamiliar lady. Even though you're in the hospital, Grandpa seemed to be having fun.
I see.
Grandpa is so sneaky. Having a party when you're not around. I saw it. They were drinking really fancy food and delicious-looking juice at home. I didn't know how to respond to Eric's confession. Unable to come up with a clever retort and trying not to let it show that I was clearly at a loss for words, I realized that the smile I had desperately put on was strained. Melissa lifted Eric off my bed, took some change out of her wallet, and said, "Go buy yourself some juice," sending him out of the hospital room. Then, with a solemn expression, she came close to my side and began to recount the event she had just witnessed. Melissa and Eric had apparently entered my house using the spare key, as per my request. Since it was a weekday afternoon, they thought no one would be home and entered the house without much thought. However, they found neatly arranged women's luggage in the entryway, and they could faintly hear Robert's laughter coming from the living room. Thinking, "Oh, is he off work today?" they approached the living room. Melissa thought he might be watching TV and laughing. However, through the slightly open gap in the living room door, they saw Robert sitting on the sofa next to an unfamiliar woman. Moreover, the woman was apparently leaning her body against his arm, whispering something faintly into his ear. Melissa instinctively scooped up Eric and left the house as is. On the way here, Eric asked me why we didn't say hello. I blurted out that Grandpa is forcing himself because Granny is not feeling well and he's lonely. I made up an excuse that I didn't even understand myself.
Melissa apologized to me, looking thoroughly remorseful. I quickly said to her, "It's okay, don't worry about it." "I'm sorry." Then, Eric returned to the hospital room with a happy face, holding a juice. Eric spent time on my bed, chatting about trivial things and laughing cheerfully. Melissa watched this with a complicated expression, but I told her in a small voice, "I'll be fine." After the two of them left the hospital room, I opened Where's Waldo in the suddenly quiet room. It's not that I particularly wanted to read it. It's not that I wanted to find Waldo, but I wanted to somehow sort out the indescribable feelings welling up in my heart. As I stared at the many people depicted in the picture book, my vision gradually blurred with tears, and I could no longer see anything. 3 days after being hospitalized, I was safely discharged. Robert, who managed to find time in his busy work schedule to pick me up on the day of my discharge, spent time with me with his usual gentle smile, so I spent the day as I always did. On weekday mornings, I make breakfast for him as usual and see him off at the entrance as usual. It's the start of the same daily routine as always, but beneath the surface of that life, my plan was beginning to take shape. The catalyst for the plan was William. He must have heard from Melissa that Robert might be cheating. He came while I was in the hospital and quietly expressed his anger. "Let's perplex Dad." I leaned forward with keen interest at my son's suggestion. Rather than being angry about being cheated on, I might have just wanted to confront him with the fact of his infidelity and fluster him. With William's cooperation, the plan to capture Robert's cheating scene properly was quietly underway. First, William consulted with a lawyer and hired a private investigator, resulting in obtaining photos of the cheating scene in a short period. In a detective agency located in a rental building in the bustling district, a dubious-looking elderly man handed me a file summarizing the investigation results. In the photos, Robert had his usual gentle smile, walking happily through town with a woman I didn't know. I had obtained that decisive evidence, but for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to blame him. I was certainly sad about being cheated on, but it's a fact that he has been working hard to earn money for the family. Is it right to focus on the infidelity part alone, neglecting the gratitude for that and putting the spotlight on our marriage up until now? If I confront him with the results of the infidelity investigation, and if it leads to divorce, what will happen to my life now? After leaving the office, I stood still in the crowded downtown area, feeling as if I had become lost. Even if I condemn my husband with the results of this infidelity investigation, what will happen to my life? With such uncertainty looming over me, I sit in front of my computer in the living room at home. My work as a writer consisted of small articles and columns, but perhaps because I had been doing it for a long time and gained trust, the requests never ceased. However, when I reread the completed articles and columns, I let out a big sigh. I don't think I have talent as a writer. I used to be good at weaving words together and creating works that touched readers' hearts. But lately, I feel like something is missing. I reread my past works and became anxious, wondering if my talent had disappeared somewhere. Am I emotionally weakened because my husband cheated on me? Even as I asked myself this question, I couldn't help but shake my head. It's not that I have changed. Surely, in the creative process, hardships and setbacks are necessary. When I first started working as a writer, it was so much fun. I was thrilled beyond words to put my thoughts into writing and have someone read them. Such enjoyable times can't last forever, and sometimes stagnation and trials will come. As I was pondering such thoughts, the house phone rang. It was from the detective I had hired for the infidelity investigation. I only vaguely remembered his face, but I recalled that he seemed suspicious.
He quickly got to the point after a brief greeting. "Did you read the last line?" the detective said.
I didn't read it very carefully."
Since my assignment this time was an infidelity investigation, I thought it was unnecessary. But I happened to find an interesting fact. If you didn't know, Allison, I thought William wouldn't know either, so I casually included it in the document.
I see. Given my profession, I've done a lot of infidelity investigations. You may not know this, but the behavior patterns of cheating men are almost always the same. I guess their brain structures are the same.
But you know, I could tell the detective was laughing happily over the phone.
Your husband's behavior was odd from the first day of the investigation. Normally, my job would be to capture the scene of infidelity in a photograph, and that's it. However, I talked to the lawyer, and since it's the 10th anniversary of the office's establishment, I decided to provide some extra service.
After hanging up the phone, I looked through the infidelity investigation materials again. I carefully read the contents written there and took a deep breath. Why? Now, the words my grandson Eric said to me are deeply etched in my heart. With those clear eyes, without any doubt, he asked me a straightforward question. Why do adults laugh when they're lonely? 1 month later, I told Robert that I was going on a trip with my son's family and smiled at him as he saw me off at the entrance of our home. Pulling a carry-on bag that wasn't very full, I headed towards the station. Without any particular destination in mind, I simply let myself be swayed by the train, gazing at the scenery visible from the window. When Robert and I were young, we always took the train for our dates. Until we got married, we didn't own a car and always met up at a coffee shop in front of the station that offered specialty teas. On the menu, the names of the tea leaves, such as Candy and Dimbula, were meticulously listed one by one. We always arrived 30 minutes before the appointed time, and Robert always drank mallow tea. Mallow is a hollyhock flower. When a thin slice of lemon placed beside the blue tea, the color of a southern sea, brewed in a heat-resistant glass, is lightly squeezed, it magically turns the tea pink. I quietly watched this sight. "It's beautiful," he murmured, not referring to the beautifully colored mallow tea, but quietly gazing at me. I couldn't help but give a wry smile at his usual cliché line. Thinking about it now, we were a foolish couple, but I was certainly happy back then. Even though I should be frustrated and angry about Robert cheating on me, for some reason, what I remember is the mallow tea that Robert always drank back then. Without giving it much thought, I entered a random coffee shop. There was no mallow tea on the menu. I chose a menu item labeled black tea, without the names of the tea leaves listed, and as I sat down, I let my gaze wander over the strings of characters printed in the book I had brought, which my mind could hardly recognize as sentences at this point. For a long time, I spent my time like that. Feeling uncomfortable staying in the same coffee shop for too long, I hopped to 2 more coffee shops. Those shops didn't offer mallow tea either. I just wandered aimlessly, walking around the city, entering coffee shops that caught my eye. And I felt a little disappointed when I unconsciously searched for that name in the menu items and couldn't find it. The mallow tea in my memories was starting to become a vague color in my recollection. As night fell, I returned home. I inserted the key into the keyhole as usual and headed towards the living room as usual. Sure enough, there were Robert and a woman. The two of them were speechless. They were frozen in surprise, as if time had stopped. Quiet classical music flowed from the built-in speakers, and there were stylish hors d'oeuvres placed on the table. Warm steam rose from the blue mallow tea that the two of them were about to drink, having apparently finished their meal. I didn't utter a word. Robert didn't try to speak either. The gentle tones of the music spread throughout the living room, and a strange moment passed where we simply stared at each other. Eventually, William came in, making a rough noise, and when he spotted Robert, he let out an exaggerated sigh. Behind William, Melissa was also peeking in with an anxious expression.
Hey, hey! What kind of party is this? You don't mind if we join in too, right? Wait a minute. What are you trying to do, all of a sudden?
As Robert stood up from the sofa, the woman next to him timidly grabbed his sleeve, looking frightened. She was a plain woman, about 12 years younger than me. She had unremarkable, delicate facial features. She wore light-colored jeans and a hoodie with a stretched-out neckline. Wearing hardly any makeup, she whispered in a reserved voice.
That's not it. Our relationship is not what you all think it is.
Oh, is that so? But we have evidence, like photos. William triumphantly held out the photos he had in front of the woman's face. They captured images of the two of them walking together, looking close, dining together, and so on. The woman averted her gaze from the photos shown to her and smiled faintly with a lonely expression.
I'm not very successful, but I'm a stage actress.
That's right. She's an actress, and as part of her character development, I'm providing acting guidance to help her gain experience in infidelity. Don't get the wrong idea. Caught off guard by the unexpected words stage actress, William and Melissa looked at each other. The woman calmly explained the circumstances up to this point. She admitted that she and Robert had indeed dined alone together in this house. They had also engaged in behavior that simulated dating in the city. However, she insisted that it was all part of her character development as an actress, and Robert was simply cooperating with her. There was certainly no definitive evidence that Robert and the woman were in a romantic relationship. But when I asked why Robert had to cooperate with such a thing, the woman, who had seemed plain until now, suddenly looked at me with an alluring expression.
That's because he was lonely, wasn't it?
Lonely?
Robert said that Allison is always going on trips and doesn't properly face him. He's busy with work, so he doesn't have time to be with her.
I know that whenever I, who usually works remotely, mention going on a trip, Robert takes advantage of the opportunity to invite women over to our home and indulge himself. I also know that he told me he was staying at the company for work, but he was actually meeting with women. Everything Robert says about the company being busy is a complete lie. I know that he actually finishes work on time but spends his nights out late. I know that my kind husband's smiles are all lies. But if I denounce everything as a lie right here and now, everything will fall apart and disappear. Like a soap bubble, it will burst and vanish. The mallow tea I drank with him at the coffee shop was like magic, it was so beautiful. Have I been under a spell since I met him back then? If I were to leave this place now with a forced smile, saying something like, "So that's how it was. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding," it would be like publicly acknowledging his infidelity. As I struggled to find the right words to say, Melissa put her arm around my shoulder from the side. "Allison, it's okay. Don't hold back. When people are lonely or sad, they don't force themselves to smile. People who display the opposite emotions of what they feel are usually liars." At Melissa's words, which likely had no basis, I couldn't help but laugh. That's right. That's true. When people are lonely, they don't laugh. I can't imagine continuing to live with a husband who justifies his actions to fill the gaps in his heart because he's lonely, and spends his days with a self-righteous smile. This is fine. All this time, I've been pretending to be fooled by Robert's kind smile. I've been playing the role of a foolish wife. Maybe I was deceiving myself, thinking that I couldn't go on living if I didn't do that. I had been a housewife for so long, dabbling in hobbies masquerading as jobs, that I had grown too accustomed to the lukewarm comfort of my life, almost forgetting what I truly wanted for myself. The future where I could earnestly write and publish articles about the things I discovered during my travels, and have someone read them. I should start considering that more seriously. Turning away from my always calm and kind husband, I knew I had to become independent. I could no longer believe his lies.
Robert! I'm leaving you. I keep telling you, it's a misunderstanding. I'm just helping her rehearse her play. There's no evidence of an affair. And I can't afford any compensation. Sure, there might not be enough evidence for a lawsuit to demand compensation. But William and Melissa will support me. And I doubt our relatives will side with you given the circumstances.
Robert gave a wry smile and ran a hand through his hair, as if admitting defeat. I suddenly produced the documents investigated by the detective, pointing to the relevant details. Robert's eyes followed my finger to the specified part, and his thin smile finally disappeared, his face turning pale. Although it wasn't related to the infidelity investigation, the detective had found that Robert's savings exceeded $1 million.
You won the lottery a year ago. Congratulations. $1 million is quite something. No. You've been leaving work on time every day and taking a lot of paid leave. Did you think having money would keep you safe if your affair was discovered?
I glared harshly at the woman involved with him.
Even in a normal divorce, I would get at least $500,000. If you don't admit to the affair, I'll spend whatever it takes to win in court. But if you admit to the affair now, I'll only claim compensation from him. After all, you were just after his money, weren't you?
The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly, looking down. William and Melissa seemed unable to grasp the rapid turn of events. In short, I was leaving Robert, it's as simple as that. The divorce was finalized without incident, and compensation was paid. After the division of assets, he still had a considerable amount of money left, but having won the lottery, he lost motivation for his job and was taken off the promotion track. The woman who had continued seeing him for a while also broke up with him as his financial situation worsened. She probably never achieved much success as an actress, as her name never became well known. William and Melissa offered to let me live with them, but I thanked them and chose to rent an apartment and live alone.
Are you sure you don't want to live with us? I have plenty of money now, and I'm going to travel freely and explore the country.
I resolved to live my life to the fullest from now on. It's my life, after all. I don't want to live by watching someone else's expressions or ignoring lies I can see right through. From now on, I will express what I think clearly to those around me. Now, I'm enjoying my work as a travel writer, a dream I had given up on while doing housework and raising children. Every time I read replies and support emails from readers, or messages saying they traveled to the same places I did, my heart, once blue, transforms like mallow tea with a touch of lemon, clear and warm, with a hint of tartness. I had just remarried a younger man, Tarek, and we were setting up our new home together. I was looking forward to starting a fun life together, just the two of us, when suddenly, an unexpected turn of events occurred.
Kent and Alyssa are moving in with us.
I couldn't believe my ears when Tarek told me this. He was planning to let his son, Kent, from his previous marriage, and Kent's wife, Alyssa, live in the house I had bought.
Isn't it wonderful to have a bigger family?
Alyssa's unabashed words made me furious. And then, on the day they were supposed to move in, I got a call from a furious Alyssa.
Oh, you found out already?
I couldn't help but smile like a witch. The truth was, I never intended to live with them from the start. My name is Misty, I'm 51 years old. I met Tarek, who is 8 years younger than me, 2 years ago, and we got married quickly after about 6 months of dating. Getting married to a younger man after turning 50 would have attracted all kinds of criticism back in the day, but there was a reason for it. That's because my first marriage was arranged through an acquaintance. The family of my ex-husband, Sterling, was wealthy, and Sterling, who was born into affluence, might have looked plain but was a gentle and kind person.
"From now on, I'll work outside, so you can relax at home," he said.
True to his word, I quit my job and became a housewife. Fortunately, before I could start feeling bored, we were blessed with a daughter, Kelly, a year into our marriage, and I found myself in a relatively happy family life. But that life didn't last long. 8 years into our marriage, Sterling died in a car accident. The shock of suddenly losing my partner and the anxiety of having to raise Kelly alone darkened my life in an instant. However, luckily, Sterling had left behind a fortune, so I didn't struggle financially. And Kelly, being a kind and sensible child, was considerate of me, making child-rearing not too difficult. Despite being hit by misfortune suddenly, I now think I've lived a relatively blessed life, with Kelly growing up well. Still, there were times when I pondered the possibilities of another life. If I had declined the acquaintance's introduction back then, would my life have been completely different? But it was pointless to think about what-ifs now. I had to accept my situation and move on. After Sterling passed away, while raising Kelly, I started working as a writer for cooking magazines from home. An old boss from the publishing company I used to work for had offered me the job. Working from home meant less hassle, but it also meant fewer opportunities to meet new people. In that manner, I settled into a monotonous life consumed by work and parenting. Even after Kelly moved out and became independent, nothing changed. I would wake up at the same time every day, work, occasionally have meetings, eat the meals I prepared myself in between, work some more, then sleep. Amidst these repetitive days, I met Tarek, a freelance photographer, through an editor of a magazine. Over 40 and younger than me, he was a stylish and handsome man. Both of us had been married before. I had a distinguished 28-year-old daughter, and he had an adult son who was about to get married.
"Let's enjoy our second life without taking things too seriously,"
Tarek suggested, and I decided to marry him without overthinking it. He was completely different from Sterling, and I found his lightheartedness refreshing. Tarek was immediately friendly, and he knew all about stylish shops and lively places I was unfamiliar with. Absorbing new things from him felt like I was reclaiming the time that had passed. Wanting to do something for him in return, I invited him over to my house and treated him to my best homemade dishes.
"I don't know if you'll like it, but I enjoy cooking. It's really delicious. If I'm going to marry, it has to be to a woman who's good at cooking."
Being praised for my cooking made me very happy.
"For you, I'd make delicious meals every day." "Really? Then I'll take you up on that every day."
And so, our married life began with Tarek coming to live in my house. However, once we started living together as a couple, some concerns emerged. Of course, I was prepared for some discomfort since two people living together would inevitably have differences.
"Lately, you haven't talked much about your work. Is there something worrying you?"
I tried to subtly inquire about his work. Then, lounging on the sofa, Tarek answered, "Actually, I'm on a break right now. There are various reasons, but don't worry, I'm getting financial support from my parents." It seemed Tarek was almost unemployed. But since we weren't in a relationship with plans to have and raise children, I decided not to pry further into his private life. I wanted our second life to be free from domestic encumbrances, living more like lovers than anything else. Several months passed since Tarek and I started living together. Then, suddenly, he said he wanted to move. My current apartment was located in a suburb, over an hour's drive from downtown. After losing Sterling, I moved here seeking a better environment to raise Kelly, and I've lived here ever since. Compared to downtown, it was safer and blessed with nature, making it a comfortable place for people of all ages, and I liked it.
If we live in a place with so many old people, you'll become an old woman soon,
he joked. His words stuck with me, but I laughed it off, thinking getting angry would mean admitting I was an old woman. Then, where do you want to live, Tarek?
Somewhere within 10 minutes of downtown would be nice.
But wouldn't that be a bit too noisy?
Don't worry, home is where the heart is, as they say. When it comes to living, convenience is the most important.
Feeling a bit uneasy about his desire for convenience despite not working, I thought perhaps this town didn't suit Tarek's vibe after all. Living in his preferred location might make him more positive about work. Besides, the stylish vibe he had when we met had faded recently. For his sake, I decided to listen to Tarek's wishes. From that day on, I started looking for a house where Tarek and I could live together. However, using the inheritance from Sterling for Tarek's sake made me feel guilty. After much deliberation, I ended up calling Kelly for advice. As I mentioned earlier, she had already become independent and was now working abroad. Kelly, who was once a girl I felt needed my protection after Sterling's death, had grown into a sharp, business-minded woman. Expecting her to disapprove, I was surprised by her indifferent response.
The inheritance Dad left is yours, Mom, and I've moved out, so you shouldn't worry about it.
As much as I was proud of her for becoming an independent woman, her words felt somewhat distant. It was the same when I remarried. She only said,
"Congratulations," without asking about my partner.
However, if being happy about her independence is what's expected, then perhaps it's me who hasn't learned to let go. Understood, Kelly. I've decided to live my own life, I declared firmly.
Just don't have any regrets, Mom.
With those words, Kelly hung up the phone. Not having regrets. That phrase felt like a thorn in my heart. Following that, Tarek and I continued to look at various properties. Watching him happily inspect each one made me happy too. However, the newly built detached house with gardens in his preferred area were far too expensive. In the end, I had to ask Tarek to compromise, and a friend recommended a reasonably nice, used property. 20 minutes from downtown. Well, it's better than living in a town like a nursing home before, so it's fine. Tarek's words were laced with sarcasm. Although he didn't mean any harm, his remarks have increasingly bothered me. Perhaps my romantic feelings for him had faded. This thought suddenly filled me with insecurity. Tarek, do you love me? I blurted out a question that seemed childish. I knew it wasn't something a woman over 50 should ask. But the fear of losing my current happiness made me say it. Hearing my anxious question, Tarek suddenly looked at me kindly.
What are you talking about? I married you because I love you. Besides, Misty, you're the best partner I've ever had.
Whether it was a lie or truth, those words reassured me once again. Having decided to live with Tarek, I had to trust him more than anyone else. And so, we set up a new home close to downtown. Living in a house wasn't bad at all once we settled in. We could grow a few vegetables in the garden, and planting flowers made the whole house brighter. If it was just the two of us in a carefree life, I didn't mind where we were. That was what I thought until Tarek suggested something outrageous.
Living close to downtown really is convenient, isn't it? But don't you think this house is too big for just the two of us?
I couldn't help but ask.
What do you mean? If we live in a big house just by ourselves, it'll become dreary.
But,
Tarek, you were the one who wanted a detached house?
Yeah, that's why I thought it would be good if we all lived together. So, in about 3 weeks.
Tarek hesitated.
Kent and Alyssa are moving in.
He said it with an innocent smile. Kent and Alyssa, as in from your ex-wife? He had a son named Kent from his previous marriage, but after the divorce, the ex-wife took custody and raised him back in her hometown. Now, he's an adult and recently got married. If I recall correctly, Kent's wife was named Alyssa.
They want to live in the city. It seems like young people from the countryside always dream of city life. I've never really done anything father-like, so I at least want to fulfill Kent's wish.
Hearing Tarek talk so lightly, I became deeply suspicious. Could it be that marrying me and getting me to buy a house was his goal all along? If he never loved me and was only after my assets, then the moment the house was bought, I would become unnecessary, right? That thought brought on an unprecedented panic. There had already been times when he wouldn't come home for days without contact, or he would just read my messages and ignore them. I had suspected there might be another woman. But since he always came back home, I told myself that he just had his own social life. However, I couldn't just sit back and ignore this situation.
What are you talking about, Tarek? It's out of the question. This house was bought for the two of us to live in.
I retorted angrily, and he responded with a smirk.
Why are you so mad? I'm not talking about bringing in strangers. It's just living with my son. If you love me, you'll come to love Kent too. I don't know them, and I've never even met them. Then it's about time you got to know them. Everyone is a stranger at first. Plus, my daughter-in-law Alyssa is a nice girl. Think of her as your daughter. Misty, you've been lonely ever since Kelly left, haven't you?
My anger reached its peak. What infuriated me the most was that Tarek thought of me as a lonely woman.
Left? Kelly became independent and flew the nest. I wasn't lonely, I was happy for her. Don't presume to know my feelings.
Even as I shouted in earnest, Tarek remained unfazed. He must be accustomed to disputes with women.
But you must have been lonely after losing your ex-husband and Kelly moving out. That's why you remarried at your age. It's better to admit you're feeling lonely. A home should be filled with family, bustling with life.
Tarek said this with a constant smile, leaving me at a loss for words. Perhaps there was a part of me that felt lonely. After losing Sterling and raising Kelly on my own, my life felt out of focus. Maybe I had hoped for a love that would bring clarity back into my life. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before saying,
I understand what you're saying. But I'd at least like to get to know Kent and his wife before we all live together. Could you give me their contact information?
Tarek, looking pleased as if asking really, then made a phone call.
Hello, Alyssa? Misty says it's okay. And she wants to get to know everyone better before we all start living together.
Tarek called Alyssa first, not Kent. Probably because the power dynamic favored his daughter-in-law over his son. The enthusiasm I once had vanished, replaced by a calmness that led to a completely opposite scenario in my mind. I wanted to close the distance between us as much as possible before they moved in, to maximize the impact of their arrival. I resolved to make them regret taking a single woman like me lightly. From that day on, I exchanged messages with Alyssa daily. It seemed Alyssa was the one particularly keen on living in the city. Pretending to be kind, I sent her daily photos of trendy downtown shops and places young people might like. Each time, Alyssa, unaware of my true feelings, responded happily.
That's amazing! I've always wanted to go to that shop.
Then when you come here, I'll take you to lots of places. I didn't go out much with my daughter Kelly, so can I think of you as my own daughter? Of course. Forget about Kelly who's far away, and just think of me as your daughter.
Her words made me feel insincere.
The family's getting bigger, how wonderful.
Alyssa, mistaking her acceptance as being favored. She's probably just naive, not realizing the implications of her words. Just a kid voicing her desires without knowing the world. Thinking this way made the situation somewhat bearable. Perhaps, in thinking I wanted a love life that could change my life, I wasn't so different.
Yes, that's right. I'll also furnish everything for you. Since you're starting a new life in a new place, everything should be new.
Alyssa responded with a voice full of joy.
Thank you, Misty.
If it were Kelly, she wouldn't have been so delighted just because I offered to buy her things. She was always considerate towards me, a single mother. Losing her dad in elementary school, she must have felt loneliness more than anyone. Yet she never once said she was lonely to me. When asked what she wanted for her birthday, she'd always say, "I just want to eat your cooking," leaving me clueless about what she really wanted, never having given her a present. Kelly always put others before herself and had many friends, yet I wish she had been a bit more dependent on me. She seemed like such a grown-up child to me. Alyssa is the complete opposite. She must have been coddled by her parents and probably Kent and Tarek as well. Which is why she can brazenly move into someone else's home. It was the same when Tarek arrived. He just showed up at my apartment and made himself at home as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Back then, I was so in love with him that I found it endearing, but now it feels like a distant memory. Today, the multitude of photos handed to me by the investigator shattered my heart completely. As expected, Tarek had been unfaithful multiple times after we got married. While confirming the results felt like an I knew it moment, the difference between suspicion and undeniable fact was devastating. In front of the investigator, I couldn't help but cry. I thought I wouldn't be upset over something like infidelity at this point, but contrary to my will, tears flowed ceaselessly. Like a stray cat fed in various places, Tarek had been unfaithful with many others. I wanted to tear up the photos of him with other women, but they were crucial evidence. And it was my issue to confront, having been swept away by naive thoughts until now. Oblivious to my feelings, Tarek spent the day lounging and watching TV as usual.
Compared to America, other countries have so much conflict. Everyone should just live in harmony and help each other out. Don't you think, Misty?
He spoke to me while I was busily cleaning beside him. A little while ago, I might have found such a demeanor endearing, but now it only filled me with disgust. Yet, I maintained my composure and replied,
"Yes, you're right. If everyone helped each other out, maybe there would be no conflicts in this world." Exactly. No one wants to fight. Just enjoying the moment and living life is enough.
Tarek yawned as he said this. Though it's true no one wants conflict, it seems he never learned that avoiding it requires sincerity and consideration for others' feelings. I found myself reminiscing about Sterling's sincerity. He lacked Tarek's charm. But he was incredibly sincere towards me. Not just towards me, but in all his dealings, it seemed. He wasn't particularly popular, but he always had a steady smile and rarely showed any emotional ups and downs. Perhaps that's why he passed away so early. Good people often seem to leave this world first, while the immature ones like Tarek and myself linger on.
Hey, Tarek. I want to do a big cleanup before Kent and Alyssa arrive, so could you leave the house for a while? Why not take a trip with them? Then you can all come back together on the moving day. I'll make the house nice and welcoming for you.
I said this and placed an envelope with money in front of him. He slowly picked it up and looked inside. You said you haven't been much of a father, right? Why not take them on a trip? Then Tarek looked up at me with a happy smile. That's a good idea. Thanks, Misty. I think they'll be happy. I watched his back as he prepared to leave and thought, goodbye, Tarek. As I watched him shrink in the distance, I muttered to myself. And then, the day Kent and Alyssa were to move in arrived. But I wasn't waiting to welcome them. I had left the house early in the morning. My destination was the airport. Kelly had finished her job overseas and was returning home today. Her return was sudden, but honestly, I felt relieved. After everything that had happened, my heart was unsettled, but with Kelly here, I believed I could return to my true self. As I headed to the airport, looking forward to seeing Kelly after a long time, my mobile phone received a message. But I pretended not to notice and continued on the bus. Ignoring the repeated messages, eventually, the phone began to ring. I picked it up as I arrived at the airport lobby. It was Alyssa. Hey! Old woman! Where are you? So, it seems I was known as Old Woman among them, not Misty. They never really thought of me as family. All our conversations had been nothing but deception. If that's the case, there's no need for me to feel guilty. I could feel the tension in my temples. The key doesn't work, and there's a for sale sign on the door. You didn't lie to us, did you? Alyssa exclaimed as if shouting. The call seemed to be on speakerphone, as I could hear voices in the background. It's no use. We can't get in. Tarek's voice was filled with distress. I could almost see him panicking, realizing the key he had was useless, but I felt no pain in my heart. With no one seeing my face, I allowed myself to smile broadly, likely forming a grin that would make anyone uncomfortable. Like that of a wicked witch. Oh, you found out? I said mockingly, with a mean-spirited laugh, conveying my feelings through the phone. What do you mean by this? Alyssa demanded, her anger clear. What do I mean? It should be obvious if you think about it. We're strangers to each other. Why would you think you could live in a house I bought? You're quite naive. Then I heard Tarek say, Give it to me, Alyssa. I have it on speaker, just speak from there. I can hear everything clearly, including all your panicking voices and everything else. Half of what I was doing felt like an act. Yet, the earnest half must seem like madness to them. Misty! What is the meaning of this? Our house is listed for sale. Just as it says. And it's not our house, it's my house. Your belongings have been sent to your parents' house. By now, they should have received the photos proving your infidelity. Oh, and I enclosed the divorce papers too, so please submit them. Sending photos of her son's infidelity to his parents might seem like a reckless move, but gentle Tarek's reaction was unexpected. Misty, are you leaving me? His voice was so feeble, almost on the verge of tears. I was taken aback by his reaction. If he had shown anger, I could have retaliated with the harsh words I had prepared. Trying to garner sympathy now? He's truly hopeless. Your sad voice won't change anything. If anyone should be crying, it's me. I retorted strongly. Dad, are you okay? This concerned voice must be Kent's. However, he didn't seem inclined to scold me. Don't cry, Dad. Just hang in there. Kent seemed to be only worried about Tarek. Maybe he's kind but ineffectual like Tarek. Which is why he ended up with someone as presumptuous as Alyssa. Instead of just lamenting, Alyssa took a more aggressive stance.
You think you can get away with this, old woman? You said you'd prepare everything for the house, so we got rid of most of our stuff. This isn't what we agreed on. What are you going to do about this?
I never told you to throw away the furniture. That was your doing. Besides, no one ever thought of me as family, right? We never had a trust relationship to begin with, so there were no promises. I let out the lines I had prepared in my head.
Pretending to be nice while being so cruel. You're the worst.
That goes both ways, Alyssa. Anyway, I just sold my own house. I'm divorcing Tarek, and he's no longer my concern. You were wrong to trust him. Then Alyssa's anger turned towards Kent.
I can't stand this anymore. Kent, I want a divorce. I married you because you said we could live in a detached house in the city.
Alyssa raged in hysteria. However, Kent could only apologize, saying, "I'm sorry." I couldn't help but criticize Kent's indecisiveness. Kent, I shouldn't be the one to say this, as an outsider, but you should think carefully when choosing a spouse. You shouldn't judge people by their looks. Better safe than sorry. Tarek then interjected.
I'd be in trouble if you left me, Misty. My parents have stopped sending me money. Without a home, what am I supposed to do tomorrow? Please come back.
I was utterly astounded by his words. Tarek, at 40, thought it normal to rely on his parents' allowances. What terrified me the most was that I had tolerated such a man. Love is blind, but waking up from that love feels like hell. Kelly had told me not to have regrets, yet I was overwhelmed by them. Sorry, but Kelly is returning from overseas today. She says she's going to work here now. So, I've decided to live with Kelly. I won't be lonely anymore, and you have plenty of company, right? You should go to them. But in truth, I knew he had nowhere to go. Because I had confronted his mistresses with the evidence of his cheating. And none of them wanted to continue seeing Tarek after seeing photos from his lawful wife. He was less welcome than a stray cat.
I have nowhere to go. Nobody is answering their phone.
Then you should go to your parents' house. Your belongings are already there. Just submit the divorce papers quickly. If you have any complaints, I'm ready to face them. I don't mind taking this to court. Suddenly, my vision started to blur. As if the focus of a camera was being lost, and the scenery in front of me became indistinct. Before everything faded, I said,
"Then, goodbye,"
and hung up the phone. Looking at the dim phone screen, I realized for the first time that I had been crying. I went to the restroom to meticulously wipe away my tears. However, Kelly, having reunited with me after a long time, immediately noticed something was wrong. She's always been sensitive to others' moods. "Mom, what happened?" Worried, Kelly asked, and I tried to remain as calm as possible in my response.
I haven't told you, but I'm thinking of getting a divorce. So, let's live together. Just the two of us, carefree, in a downtown house with a garden.
Then Kelly's expression darkened. For a moment, I feared she would refuse. Fearing my presence might be a hindrance to her independence. After all, she had her own life, and to her, my presence could be seen as a constraint. But the next moment, Kelly uttered surprising words. "Actually, there's something I haven't told you, Mom. I've been wanting to say it, but I was too scared. But listen, I'm pregnant." According to her story, Kelly had been dating a foreign man for about a year and had been considering marriage eventually. However, as soon as she discovered she was pregnant, he unilaterally broke up with her. Shocked, Kelly even considered terminating the pregnancy. But after much deliberation, she couldn't bear the thought of ending an innocent life. Ultimately, she decided to quit her job and return to her home country. I was speechless and shocked, unable to imagine Kelly going through such an ordeal. I could see a faint glimmer in Kelly's worried eyes. I embraced her and said, "I'm so happy to be a grandmother. Sterling would be delighted in heaven too. Let's take care of your baby together." Kelly then burst into tears. The first time I had ever seen her cry. I held Kelly close, determined to support her decision to keep the baby. "There's nothing to be afraid of. We'll get through this together." I comforted a pregnant Kelly as we returned home from the airport. Of course, there was no one else there. This house was now just for me and Kelly. "Mom, there's a for sale sign on this house," I responded with a reassuring smile to the worried Kelly, and tore off the for sale sign in one swift move. "That was just a bluff. This house is ours now. I renewed everything before you came back. I even cooked a lot today, especially for you. You need to eat a lot since you're pregnant." Kelly stepped into the entrance, relieved. I followed her, carrying her suitcase into the house. "Welcome home, Kelly." "I'm happy to be home, Mom." We exchanged smiles. "And welcome to our home, baby." Saying this, I touched Kelly's still slightly swollen belly, feeling the new life's heartbeat beneath my hands. A few days later, my divorce from Tarek was finalized. Abandoned by his parents and everyone else, he occasionally reached out to me, but I ignored all his attempts. He should be grateful I didn't ask for alimony in our divorce settlement. Then, I heard news of Tarek's arrest. He was caught breaking into an ex-wife's home to steal money, apparently not his first offense. Rumors had circulated about mysterious thefts at the magazine company he used to work for, leading to his industry ostracization. I thought he was harmless despite his irresponsibility, but he had been dabbling in actual crime. Continuing our relationship would have been dangerous. Moreover, Kent and Alyssa were under investigation, possibly involved in Tarek's crimes. Apparently, Alyssa had a poor relationship with her mother-in-law and had been contentious for some time. Though Tarek was considered the mastermind, I suspected Alyssa might have been the true orchestrator. Regardless, I hope they confess and atone for their crimes soon. Kelly's pregnancy progressed quickly. Even having been through childbirth myself, witnessing it from the side overwhelmed me with its mystery. Imagining the growth of the child inside her filled me with joy. Fortuitously, a book publishing offer came my way. A collection of my articles and recipes had garnered demand from many readers. Of course, as an unknown writer, publishing a book was beyond my dreams, so I eagerly accepted the offer. And so, I became a grandma, welcoming Kelly and the baby into our home, where spring had arrived and the flowers I had planted during winter were in full bloom. Seeds I had sown in the garden were sprouting, promising growth. Supporting Kelly as a single mother, I looked forward to our enjoyable second life together. My heart too was filled with the beautiful blue skies of spring. Stop being a baby just because you're pregnant. John was clutching his glass on the table, about to throw it at me. I covered my stomach with my hands, trying to protect it, and closed my eyes. When I opened them, Harper was crouching in front of me. Harper was holding her head with her hands. Blood was seeping from her hands. Harper, lying on her side, was looking at me. "Sis, take this." Harper handed me her smartphone. I nodded firmly and took it. This would be our weapon. I'm Mia, 29 years old. I quit my job due to my pregnancy and became a housewife. My husband John and I were colleagues at the same company and got married after a company romance. What brought us together was our mutual hobby of stock investing. Many people invest and save for a better life, but it's rare to find someone who considers it a hobby. We clicked because of our unusual hobby. After many niche dates, we felt secure in our future and decided to get married. After marriage, we lived in a modest apartment close to our workplace, but after discovering my pregnancy, we decided to move in with John's family. John's father David had passed away 3 years ago, leaving behind his mother Grace and his sister Harper, who were living in a spacious house that seemed too large for just the two of them, so John and I decided to move in. Although it was a bit far from work, the house was spacious and had recently been renovated, making it a comfortable home. Grace was kind, and she welcomed me with a smile when we first met. Harper seemed shy and someone who was hard to read, giving off a plain impression. When Grace found out about my pregnancy, she was overjoyed, saying, "Thank you for getting pregnant with John's child. I'll support you as much as I can," and celebrated grandly. When we decided to live together, she said, "Let's have fun living together," which made me feel that there wouldn't be any mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict in this house. Looking back, I was mistaken, and this was the beginning of my hell. On the first day of living together, Grace showed me around the house. Grace had always been considerate towards me, always saying, "Thank you for being with John," whenever possible. My friends were against me living with my in-laws, but I wasn't worried at all. My only concern was whether I could get along with Harper. She was always looking down and never made eye contact when speaking. Honestly, it was hard to understand what Harper was thinking, and I found it creepy. "She's just shy." "Harper is delicate but very skillful with her hands." Grace and John both seemed very considerate of Harper. John bragged about Harper, being proud of her and adored her unusually. According to Grace, Harper would only ask to send a package once or twice a month and usually stayed in her room. She had been reclusive since high school and was not employed. However, she seemed to contribute generously to the household expenses. John's family was a bit strange but a good family, and I felt happy to be a part of it. That happiness lasted until we moved in. That night, after moving in, I was busy unpacking and didn't notice John had returned. I heard a loud voice from the entrance. It seemed like John was angry at the entrance. John, prone to complaining, often found fault with shop clerks and delivery personnel. Assuming he was complaining about damaged moving boxes, I headed to the entrance. "What's wrong? Why are you yelling? Did something break?" "It's not that. The man of the house has returned. Come greet me at the entrance." I was stunned by John's selfish remark. "What?" John seemed irritated by my lack of response. "Don't mess with me. When the man of the house comes home, you're supposed to greet him at the entrance. It's common sense." I was frightened by John's anger and apologized. "Sorry. I was busy unpacking." John glared at me with a red face. "Also, I'm the man of the house. I'm the head of the household. From now on, you should honor me when you speak to me." I was overwhelmed by his sudden change. That day, I was scolded by John for not preparing dinner and not getting the bath ready. Harper also came out of her room to see what was happening, but then she disappeared and didn't show her face again. After John went to bed, I cried in the bathroom. Why do I have to endure this treatment? I remembered the kind John before we got married. The days he took off his coat to cover me in the cold, the times he gently pulled me close when cars passed by. What was all that for? This isn't the real John. I tried to convince myself that he was just in a bad mood, that he's actually a kind and caring person. Otherwise, I couldn't see how I could continue with this marriage. I used to be so happy, but now all I feel is anxiety. And it seemed like everyone was against me, with no allies. All I could do was hope that John's mood would improve by tomorrow. But my faint hope was quickly dashed. John's attitude the next morning was the same as the night before. "Hey, or you." He would refer to me as so, not calling my name.
"Hey, you must always obey Mom,"
he said, treating me more like a slave than a housewife.
"Work for Harper's sake."
John kept saying it was for Harper's sake. His affection for Harper was abnormal. While John was smiling at Grace and Harper, he never showed me a smile. His gaze was always cold towards me. I started to have severe morning sickness around 5 months into my pregnancy, making it difficult to move. Whenever I lay down on the sofa, John would invariably scold me.
"Hey, what are you lying down for?"
"I feel sick from the morning sickness. Please let me rest a bit."
"Morning sickness? That's nothing serious. You're not working, so the least you could do is keep this house clean."
Hearing John's irritated voice made the cramps in my stomach feel worse. I was probably tensing up from stress. I knew it wasn't good for the baby, so I tried not to provoke John. If I woke up even slightly after John, he would yell at me. If he found me dozing off, he would start shouting. I was always under surveillance by John, feeling uncomfortable every day. I even thought about divorce, but I couldn't muster the courage for the sake of the baby. John had a good public facade, seen by others as the perfect husband and father. Most texts from friends where I used to work would be like,
"I'm jealous that John is your husband."
John was a trusted employee at the company, good at his job and taking care of his juniors. So he was relied upon by his boss. I couldn't argue and just replied nonchalantly, but the text I received the other day was unbelievable. "John was saying that you became selfish and that you're giving him a hard time ever since you got pregnant. You better appreciate you have a good husband, or you're going to be punished." Reading that text, I lost all hope. John was playing the perfect husband outside, and making me out to be the villain. Everyone saw his kind facade, but his real face was that of a selfish man. I complained about John to my parents, thinking my mom would understand, that she would comfort me. Maybe she would suggest coming back home to give birth. But my mom took John's side as well. She was completely deceived by John. I was lectured instead. I couldn't even go back to my parents' home. For the sake of the baby, I had no choice but to endure and keep living. But John wasn't my only enemy.
"Isn't this soup a bit too salty? Are you trying to make me sick?"
For some reason, Grace's attitude towards me changed, and she started ordering me around as well. Ever since John changed, Grace began to harass me. Every day, Grace would nitpick and make sarcastic comments.
"The way you fold the laundry isn't how we do it here. The bathroom isn't cleaned properly."
"I'm sorry." I had no choice but to obediently follow Grace's words. But when I first met Grace, she had said,
"I'll support you as much as I can."
Where did that go? Was I foolish to believe those words? Grace took advantage of me doing all the housework to laze around during the day or go out to lunch with her friends. And she would always instruct me to make John's favorite dishes. Moreover, she specified shopping at high-end supermarkets. John's favorite dishes take a lot of effort and time to prepare. While feeling dizzy from morning sickness, I somehow managed to cook, and without any appetite, I sat down at the dining table, only to find that somehow the dishes were credited to Harper, with John stuffing his cheeks while lowering the corners of his eyes.
"Harper prepared the meal again today. You really did a great job, Harper."
Unbelievably, all my household chores were being credited to Harper. Harper made all the dishes, and she's also doing the cleaning and laundry. Grace explained to John. Harper, who stays in her room, wasn't there. I wonder how it feels to be praised for something you didn't do. What could Harper be thinking, staying in her room all this time? The harassment towards me wasn't just psychological. John didn't give me any living expenses. Before we got married, we agreed to contribute to a joint account. But John's portion never got deposited. I've been dipping into the savings my parents gave me before marriage and even used up my investment earnings. Recently, I almost had my debit card from my single days taken away. I resisted desperately to keep it. After that, the treatment I received from John and Grace was terrible. Thinking only about protecting the unborn child, I continued my daily chores. Such a life couldn't last. My mind and body were nearing their limits. Struggling to get by, I reached 8 months of pregnancy. One holiday, I spent the morning listening to Grace's complaints while doing the cleaning and laundry. I had to rest frequently because of the tightness in my stomach and could hardly move. Grace, who should understand the difficulties of late pregnancy, pretended not to notice and complained. After complaining, Grace left saying she had plans with friends. John had gone out for golf since the morning. Unable to move due to the physical strain of daily work, I reluctantly hired a housekeeping service. In the afternoon, the housekeeper came and did the cleaning, laundry, grocery shopping, and even meal prep. Feeling relieved that the chores were done, I collapsed on the sofa. Unable to keep my eyes open. I needed to put away my half-drunk glass on the table or John would scold me. I must tidy up. But my consciousness faded. I woke up with a pain in my thigh. John was looking down at me. With a furious expression. I instinctively rubbed my thigh. Apparently kicked by John. "Hey, what are you doing?" Instead of looking at John, I looked upstairs. Harper was peering down. I hurriedly apologized. "I'm sorry, I wasn't feeling well and must have fallen asleep." "Pregnancy is no excuse to slack off on household chores." John kicked my thigh again. I grimaced in pain. "Why are you letting a housekeeping service do the chores?" John was holding the housekeeping contract in his hand. I had left the contract on the table, intending to put it away but fell asleep. Normally, I would apologize, but I had reached my limit. I sighed. "I'm 8 months pregnant and have been warned of the risk of preterm labor due to strong abdominal tightness. Pregnancy isn't an illness. What are you slacking off for?" I stared at John. Who does he think the father of this child is? "You went out to enjoy golf." "My body is at its limit." I mustered the courage to confront John. John clenched his fists, trembling with anger. Despite my fear, I felt more indignant towards John. "Let me rest a bit. I hired the housekeeping service with my own money. There's nothing wrong with that." John was about to retort angrily, but I couldn't take in his words. I ignored him and closed my eyes. John's loud yelling made me open my eyes again. He was clutching a glass on the table, about to throw it at me. I covered my stomach with my hands and closed my eyes. Then I heard the sound of breaking glass. When I opened my eyes, Harper was crouched in front of me. Harper was holding her head with her hands. Blood was seeping from her hands. "Harper, are you okay?" I jumped up and called out to her. Harper, still crouching. "I'm okay," she replied in a weak voice. The floor was staining with blood. John stood there, dumbfounded. Even when I called out to John, he remained frozen, clutching his head. Despite being shaken, I managed to call for an ambulance. With Harper still crouched down, I brought a towel and pressed it against her head. The towel quickly soaked with blood. The amount of blood made me fear for Harper's life. I was terrified, but I knew Harper was the real victim here. Wanting to comfort her, I hugged her as tightly as I could. After a while, I heard sirens, and the ambulance arrived. I managed to help Harper stand up and walked her to the entrance, supporting her. John, in a panic, "I'm not to blame. It's your fault for not doing the chores," kept muttering. At the entrance, I told John to accompany us in the ambulance. However, Harper objected.
My brother? No, he's the one who hurt me. I don't want him.
John looked displeased, but said nothing more. Urged by the paramedics, I got into the ambulance. Harper, lying down, looked at me. Sis, take this. Harper handed me her smartphone. I nodded and took it firmly. This would become our weapon. I thanked Harper. Upon arriving at the hospital, Harper was immediately taken to the treatment room. I had informed John of the hospital's name where Harper was taken. While waiting for Harper's treatment, John and Grace arrived.
What did you do to Harper?
Grace immediately directed her anger at me upon arrival. I wanted to retaliate but restrained myself due to being in a hospital, mindful of other patients. Grace, undeterred by the surroundings, loudly complained to me.
I won't forgive you if Harper's work is affected.
I was astounded by her concern. Grace was more worried about Harper's loss of income than her well-being. Harper's profession is a jewelry designer. She designs rings, earrings, and bracelets from her room. Highly popular and contracted with major jewelry brands. Harper's income must be significantly higher than John's annual salary. Grace's primary concern seemed to be the potential loss of income. Such a terrible mother. The seldom used car and probably even their house were likely purchased with Harper's earnings. It was exactly as I had heard from Harper. Harper had once told me, "Mom cares more about my money than me." Watching Grace blame me, John started accusing me as well.
That's right, it's your fault. This happened because you slacked off on the chores. It's all your fault.
While they berated me nonsensically, two men in suits approached from behind. I interrupted John and Grace's complaints.
Should we ask these gentlemen here if I'm really to blame?
John and Grace turned around in surprise.
These are the police officers I called.
John and Grace were shocked.
Why would you call the police?
Because this is a serious assault case. John threw a glass, and Harper got seriously injured.
What are you talking about? You did it.
How could they twist the story like that? I stared at John, who averted his eyes. Sighing, I began playing a video on Harper's smartphone that I had received. The video captured me being kicked by John and everything up until I called the ambulance. Watching the video, Grace turned pale. She looked at John.
John, what is this all about?
John remained silent, head down. Grace turned to me.
Why do you have Harper's phone?
Harper gave it to me to protect me.
To protect you? What do you mean? Explain.
Grace demanded, trembling. In this household, I had one ally. Harper was on my side. From the day we moved in, Harper was aware of Grace's harassment and John's violence. She occasionally came out of her room to check on me. Horrified by how badly I was treated, and decided to leave evidence by installing hidden cameras around the house. I showed Grace additional footage.
Everything you've done to me is captured here.
The footage, complete with audio, captured John's verbal abuse and Grace's dehumanizing behavior, eliciting puzzled looks from the police officers present. John and Grace's faces contorted.
Who's the real culprit here?
I smiled maliciously.
But why would Harper side with you?
I smiled broadly.
That's because Harper was bullied and exploited by you,
I said in a low, menacing voice. Harper, too, was a victim of Grace. John and Grace, perhaps intimidated by my presence, took a step back. Until John and I lived together, Harper was harassed by Grace. Harper started her career as a jewelry designer while a student, initially earning very little. Grace, frustrated that Harper's pursuit was not profitable, tried to kick her out. It was David, still alive at the time, who stopped her. David created a bank account specifically for Harper and provided financial support. Eventually, Harper's talent was recognized, and she started earning an income, but by then, David had passed away. Harper planned to leave home to escape Grace, but found herself unable to do so when Grace took control of her bank account. For Grace, keeping Harper at home meant having more income. Moreover, with Harper around, John would often return home. This made Grace even less willing to let Harper go. Grace was frequently harsh to Harper. She repeatedly say, "John is my only real child." Harper had a boyfriend and considered eloping when our living together was decided. And that's when the harassment shifted towards me. The night we moved in, I was berated by Grace and ended up crying in the bathroom. That was when Harper approached me. "I never thought she would bully a pregnant woman. That person is a devil in human form. Will you join me in defeating the devil?" From that day on, our joint struggle against Grace began. The smartphone Harper handed me in the ambulance became our weapon. Grace was flustered by the incontrovertible video evidence. John stood frozen, trembling. At that moment, the police approached John and Grace. "Let's hear the details at the police station," they said in a cold, impersonal tone. John turned to leave, but the police blocked his way. "I haven't done anything wrong. I have no obligation to go," said Grace, trying to push past the police. Then, the treatment room door opened, and Harper, with a bandage on her head, came out in a wheelchair. "Are you okay, Harper?" "I'm fine, brother," Harper replied without looking at John and asked the police to take them away. "Please take these two to the police station quickly. I'll do anything. Testify, provide evidence, you name it." Harper glared coldly at John and Grace. The police took John and Grace by the arms and led them away. "Are you okay, Harper?" I rushed to Harper after the police took John and Grace away. "Yes, I'm fine. Just a small cut on my forehead," Harper said, smiling at me. I smiled back, relieved. "Head bleeds easily. And I'm just in my wheelchair for a precaution since I injured my head. I'm glad it's not serious." Harper couldn't be discharged until the test results came out and had to be hospitalized for the day. As I was about to go back for our things, Harper's boyfriend, Michael, arrived. Michael was shocked to see Harper in the wheelchair and hugged her, half crying. Harper, reassured, also cried. I quietly left the room, not wanting to intrude. The next day, Harper was discharged after the tests showed no serious issues. Harper and I returned home together. Michael, worried, followed us. Grace and John had not yet returned. We decided to search for Harper's debit card, thinking it was our only chance. In the afternoon, John and Grace returned. Seeing me sitting on the living room sofa, they immediately started accusing me. "How could you?" "Yeah, because of you, Mom and I got lectured at the police station," John said. I stood my ground, retorting. After all, I had strong allies by my side. "Be glad you weren't filed a complaint against it. You even led my sister astray. I'll never forgive you for this." Then, Harper and Michael came down the stairs. "Who's been led astray?" John, seeing Harper, was taken aback. Harper held the debit card in her hand. Grace's expression changed instantly when she found it. "John, Mia wants to give you something." Harper hinted at me with a look. I presented the divorce papers in front of John. "You're not seriously thinking of divorcing me, are you?" "Yes, I am." John clutched the divorce papers tightly. "Enough with the jokes. Just sign it. It's more manly to just fill it out quickly. I've always thought you and Mia weren't a good match." "What do you mean?" "Mia is too good for you. Now, hurry up and write." Like under a spell, John placed the divorce papers on the living room table and started to fill them in. John, who used to verbally abuse me and treat me like a slave, was now doing exactly as his sister had said. I can see why Harper called John creepy. Even as he filled out the divorce papers, John kept looking at Harper. I snatched the divorce papers as if to claim them. Submitting these would sever my ties with this house.
Shall we go then?
John tried to reach out to Harper. Unperturbed, Harper took Michael's hand and headed for the entrance. I gave John and Grace a cold look.
I will never forget what you did to me, Grace. And don't you forget either, John.
With that, I left the house with Harper and the others.
This isn't over yet,
I muttered to myself. I sent an email to John's workplace, dubbing it a divorce notification. I also sent a video to my friend at his workplace. Now, everyone will see John's true colors. Lately, he hasn't been talking to anyone. My friend emailed me.
I think John's going to quit his job soon.
Later, I consulted a lawyer for free advice and filed for divorce alimony and child support. Given John's nature, I also requested a restraining order to prevent stalking. I agreed not to file a police report in exchange for getting the child support in a lump sum. Now, I won't have to worry about non-payment. John didn't come near me thanks to the restraining order, but I heard he came begging to Harper. John ambushed Harper on her way home, crying and clinging to her feet. John directed all his anger at Grace.
It's your fault Harper hates me. Mia leaving is also your fault. You took away all my happiness.
After lashing out at Grace with his grievances, he left the house. Harper told me that Grace had contacted her. Grace seems to be living like a recluse, concerned about the neighbors' eyes. To that Harper told me,
"This is the retribution for what she did to me."
With a cold look. 2 months later, I gave birth to a healthy boy. Harper was there for the birth.
I want to have a cute baby like yours someday.
Michael, standing behind her, blushed, which I found adorable. I sent the video to my parents, who had blindly trusted John and refused to believe me. My parents apologized profusely and went to complain to Grace. Their house had become littered with trash with no one cleaning. Grace's response was slow, even to their complaints, and my parents left feeling terrified. Anyway, I have a son who is the apple of my eye and a strong friend named Harper. Life as a single mother will have its challenges, but it seems like it will be enjoyable. I still have the money I saved from investments before marriage, and it's doing well, so there's no rush to return to work. Seeing how remorseful my parents are, it might be nice to go back home. I'm considering taking it easy at my parents' house for a while.
Help! Actually, my parents.
Yesterday, I was hit by a car driven by my MIL, Lorene, and was rushed to the hospital. After the surgery, while I was resting, my husband called me.
After you were taken away yesterday, the police came, but I told them you got scared by the car and fell. And now today, Mom is saying she hit you.
Summarizing my husband's excited rambling, it seems both my in-laws were taken to the police station. Indeed, yesterday, I was hit and injured by the car Lorene was driving. Yet, the person who drove, Lorene, and the passenger, my FIL Larry, had lied. They had conspired under my husband's instructions to make it seem like I had fallen and injured myself. I was dumbfounded and lost for words for a while.
Hey! Are you listening? Anyway, you need to go and explain yourself that you just fell.
These were the first words he spoke to me after I was rushed to the emergency. My anger reached its limit, and I decided to take revenge on my husband and in-laws. They must think I'll always do as they wish, but not anymore. That's when it hit me. Yes, this will surely prove that Lorene hit me. With my body still in pain, I reached for my smartphone again. My name is Alicia, 50 years old. Since getting married, I've been a housewife. I met my husband Colt in my 20s, in a typical office romance. He was assigned to take care of me when I joined as a new graduate. Even back then, my husband wasn't particularly handsome, nor did he have traits that were attractive to women. Of course, at that time, I didn't have any romantic feelings for him. I never once considered him in a romantic way, just diligently followed his orders every day. However, after working together for a while, he took a liking to me. He must have been happy to have a subordinate close in age, but gradually I realized it was more than that. Initially, I wasn't keen, but being flattered every day made me feel better. Thinking about it calmly, I don't know what he liked about me. But I got carried away by his sweet talk, and we ended up dating. Though we worked together for a while, about a year later, he proposed. I had no particular reason to refuse, so I accepted his proposal. Convincing myself that this was just how things are, I started a new life. Upon his insistence, I quit my job to become a housewife and, without any say, started living with his parents. I had visited my in-laws a few times after getting married, but never imagined I'd be living with them. When we met, they both welcomed me warmly, making me think there was nothing to worry about. By the time I realized, Larry had retired, and I was left alone with my in-laws while my husband was at work. There was hardly any sweet newlywed life, far from the marriage I had imagined. At first, they seemed somewhat considerate, but gradually their attitude towards me changed. Lorraine's demands grew day by day, and the stress was crushing me. Because of Colt, you get to be a housewife, so you should at least be perfect at household chores, right? Every time something didn't please her, Lorraine would scold me with delight. She never doubted that educating a bad daughter-in-law was her mission, as if it gave her life meaning. Lorraine herself had lived with her mother-in-law. I remember when I got tired of hearing her old stories. Times and values have changed since then. Being forced to accept such mindsets was nothing but annoying. Yet, due to my position, I had no choice but to silently endure her nagging. Lorraine would go out to karaoke with friends of her age a few times a week, and it seems they would enjoy talking badly about their daughters-in-law. Strangely, my daughter-in-law is so competent. Is not what they brag about, but rather, such a terrible daughter-in-law, is what they take pride in discussing. Hearing such stories, I wondered if I would end up like them someday, which made me feel gloomy. As for Larry, he wasn't on my side either. Though he didn't antagonize me as much as Lorraine, he complained about my cooking almost every day. Today's seasoning is especially strong. Are you serving such unhealthy food because you wish the elderly would just disappear? He feels like an outdated man from a bygone era, clearly looking down on women. He often says things like women should be a certain way, suggesting women need to be more considerate and help without being asked. It's embarrassing just listening to him, laying out his idealistic views. Thinking he can remain the same and act all high and mighty no matter his age. Larry seems more about boasting his views to me rather than harassing me, proud of his own thoughts. He'll never realize his mistakes and will just grow older in this manner. Just like those unpleasant in-laws you see in dramas. I've talked to my husband about them numerous times, but he always gives vague responses. Moreover, as our marriage has progressed, he's begun to criticize me for speaking up. You should be kinder to dad and mom since they're old. Isn't that a wife's duty? Like father, like son. Following in his parents' footsteps, my husband has also started to take me for granted and look down on me. He does nothing to help around the house when he comes back, just sits there as if it's the norm. Having children might have changed things, but we were unable to have any. We tried fertility treatments until our late 30s, but it never happened. Right after we got married. When will I see my grandchild's face? Lorraine would pressure me almost daily, asking It's not solely my fault, and children are a blessing. Creating children just for the in-laws is absurd. I thought there was no need to force it, so I gave up when I turned 40. In this less than happy life, there were people who helped me. A couple living across the street. The husband, Dawson, and his wife, Bethany, lived together without children. Dawson's mother struggled living with her mother-in-law and decided he didn't want to cause such trouble. Bethany was there for me during my struggles with infertility and would listen to my complaints about my in-laws. Since my in-laws and husband have a good public image, Bethany was surprised at first. "I thought your husband was a good man, but to see he still hasn't cut the apron strings at this age, honestly, it's a bit off-putting." Thanks to Bethany, I've been able to live through this life without feeling too burdened. Lorene, now over 75, still drives herself around. It's precarious to watch, and despite my warnings to my husband, he doesn't listen. When I suggest she should give up her license, "Are you making fun of Mom?" he gets furious, thinking I'm insulting his mother. I've tried hinting at it to Lorene, but she seems to think she's still quite young. "Are you treating me like an old woman? How unpleasant." And she, like my husband, gets furious. I've been worried something serious might happen, and that day came in an unexpected way. That day, as usual, I walked to the nearby supermarket for groceries. Walking is mostly my mode of transportation since I don't have a driver's license. I thought I'd get it after starting work, but I got married sooner than expected. When I consulted my husband, "You don't need one since I'll drive." He opposed the idea of me getting a license. On sale days, the bags are inevitably heavy, but asking my husband or Lorene for a ride is out of the question. My husband, who once happily offered rides, now just clicks his tongue in denial. Carrying heavy bags, I returned home when I noticed the garage door was open. Did she say she was going out today? Lorene hadn't mentioned anything when I left the house. Well, it doesn't matter, I thought, as I passed by the garage heading towards the entrance. That's when it happened. With a roaring engine, a car sped out of the garage. Such a foolish word slipped out in surprise. The next moment, the car, without slowing down, crashed into me. The impact sent me flying backward, groceries spilling from my bags. Lying there, I was slammed onto the asphalt ground. Unable to grasp what had happened, a severe pain assaulted the back of my head where it hit the ground. Trying to get up was futile. My body wouldn't listen, and all I could do was stare at the sky. How much time had passed? Before I knew it, Bethany was peering down at me. "Hang in there! I've called an ambulance. It's going to be okay." Bethany's face, as she spoke to me, was pale and strained. Had things really become so serious? That was the naive question that crossed my mind. Moving my aching head slightly, I could see blood flowing from it. Seeing that, I gradually began to understand the gravity of my situation. I started to realize the seriousness of the situation. But there was nothing I could do, as my body remained immobile. Eventually, I could hear the ambulance approaching, little by little. "Just a bit more. It's almost here, hang on." Bethany urged me desperately, as my head started to feel foggy. No. Just a little longer." Contrary to Bethany's words, I closed my eyes. When I next opened them, I was lying in a hospital bed. An 4 tube was attached to my hand, and I could see the fluid dripping without pause. Realizing I had been saved, tears naturally started to flow. Moving my head even slightly caused intense pain. Given the amount of blood I had lost, it was no wonder it hurt. Moaning on the bed, a nurse hurried over. "You shouldn't move your head yet." There were so many things I wanted to ask, but I silently listened to the nurse's explanation. According to her, a day had passed since the accident. I had been rushed to the hospital by the ambulance team called by Bethany. I underwent surgery to stitch up my head and was saved. Bethany had stayed with me all this time, and now, outside visiting hours, she had gone home. It seems she had also contacted my husband, but after conveying the surgery's success, that was it. My whole body ached, but there was no life-threatening danger, and I was told to rest for a while. Even so, I didn't want to do anything for the time being. There were many things I needed to think about, but I closed my eyes anyway. Soon after, my phone beside the bed kept ringing. I didn't want to answer it, so I left it, but the persistent calls continued. After ignoring it several times, it didn't seem like it would stop. Careful not to move my head, I groped for my phone and saw Colt's name on the screen. Feeling a bit relieved that he might actually be worried, I answered the phone.
Help! Actually, my parents.
My husband started speaking without letting me say a word.
After you were taken away yesterday, the police came, but I told them you were startled by the car and fell. And now today, there's a testimony that Mom hit you.
Summarizing my husband's excited rant, it seemed both my in-laws had been taken to the police station. Indeed, yesterday, I was indeed hit and injured by the car Lorene was driving. Yet, the person who drove, Lorene, and the passenger, Raphael Larry, had lied. They had conspired under my husband's instructions to make it seem like I had fallen and injured myself. I was dumbfounded and lost for words for a while.
The car, fortunately, wasn't damaged. Dad wasn't hurt, but Mom twisted her neck a bit from the collision with you. And yet, it's unfair how the police are being one-sided.
Unaware of my astonishment, he was worried about the car and his parents. How rotten can this family be? Since answering the phone, had he said even one word of concern for me? No, nothing. He was only worried about his parents being taken to the police, even going so far as to ask me, the victim, to prove their innocence.
Hey! Are you listening? Anyway, you need to go and explain that you just fell.
The number you have dialed is currently. Although my husband had been talking nonstop since the call connected, he was surprised by the first words I finally spoke.
Eh?
I then immediately hung up the phone. Afterward, calls from my husband continued for a while, but frustrated, I set my phone to reject his calls. Later, I found out that, just as my husband had said on the phone, my in-laws were taken to the police station. After a while, my husband himself was also taken to the police station where his parents were waiting. The entire episode was witnessed by Bethany, who lives across the street. Initially, it was Bethany who reported Lorene's crime to the police. After riding in the ambulance with me and taking care of various procedures in place of my husband, she was questioned by the police about the accident. It seems she was questioned after the in-laws had been, making her testimony somewhat of a corroboration. Bethany noticed the accident when she heard a loud noise outside. Looking out the window, she saw me lying on the road. She then hurriedly called an ambulance and rushed outside. By then, Lorene's car was nowhere to be seen, and she didn't understand what had happened. More than figuring out the cause, she was concerned for my well-being. Bethany told the police everything as it was. However, the in-laws immediately denied any police suggestions that I might have been hit by a car. Feeling something was off, Bethany pondered for a while even after the police officer had left. After seeing my surgery through, she went home and discussed it with her husband, Dawson. Then, Dawson came up with an unexpected solution.
The dash cam, it records 24/7. The scene should be right in front of the car, so it must have captured everything.
Together, they checked the camera installed in their car.
Just as I thought.
As Dawson predicted, the moment of the accident was recorded. There, unmistakably, was the moment Lorene hit me with her car. After I fell, Larry's face appeared from the car window, but then the car drove off quickly. A clear hit and run. With the footage of the in-laws' crime in hand, the two went to the police station. And they proved that I hadn't simply fallen and injured myself. Upon receiving testimony from Bethany and others, the police immediately began questioning the in-laws. Despite the video evidence, the in-laws were reluctant to admit their guilt.
That video is fabricated. Someone is trying to frame me. Officer, please, you can't put an old woman in jail, can you?
Both Lorene and Larry were embarrassingly defiant. Eventually, Lorene admitted to the crime, saying,
"My son told me to hide it."
Indeed, my husband had instructed them to coordinate their stories. But to think Lorene would betray her own son to save herself was beyond belief. Worn out from the interrogation, Larry confessed that although he was in the passenger seat, they fled, abandoning me. Upon their confessions, the police questioned my husband, who was also reluctant to admit his involvement. Then, a detective came to my hospital room.
"Your parents both claim they were instructed by their son to cover up the accident. Initially, they lied extensively, but this seems to be the truth."
The detective proceeded with the conversation apologetically, considering my feelings. The car showed no significant damage or dents. If my husband had worried about damage to the car and had it repaired, that would constitute evidence tampering. However, my husband must have decided calmly that it wasn't necessary. Since then, I've had no desire to see my husband, who hasn't shown his face at all. I mentioned to the detective about the call from my husband during the in-laws' questioning. He had admitted to instructing his parents to align their stories. Hearing this, the detective sighed deeply.
"I don't know what to say. I can only imagine how you feel."
The detective seemed to sympathize with me, having been betrayed by my family on top of suffering a serious injury. After a painful silence, the detective left the room. A few days later, as I was about to be discharged, the police contacted me again. Bethany, who came to pick me up from the hospital in place of my husband, drove me straight to the police station. There, the detective from the previous day greeted us. It turned out he was the same one who had heard the story from Bethany, and he led us together to a room. Inside, there were my haggard husband and in-laws. Alicia. As I entered the room guided by the detective, Lorene suddenly began to tear up. I thought it was pretentious, but it seemed she was genuinely crying. Whether she felt relieved to see a family member or relieved to see me alive, I couldn't tell. We were shown to our seats and waited until Lorene had calmed down. We waited until Lorene regained her composure, comforted by a female officer. Finally calm enough to speak, Lorene, sitting next to Larry who looked utterly exhausted, kept repeating, "I'm sorry." The specific agenda for the day was to align the details of the accident with me, the victim, involved. A screen was prepared, displaying the footage of the accident submitted by Bethany. As we watched, the detective progressed the conversation step by step. The in-laws answered the questions honestly, and I nodded in agreement, affirming the accuracy. The problem was whether my husband was involved. After hearing my story, his call history proved he had phoned me. Yet, he still claimed no recollection of instructing his parents, steadfastly denying his involvement. I hadn't recorded our conversation, so progress was difficult.
"You just want to bring me down too, you liar,"
my husband exclaimed at one point, becoming emotional despite the detective's attempts to calm him.
"Please stop. Lying further will only lead to your regret. Do you really want to betray your mom and dad just to save yourself?"
Lorene advised, but he wouldn't accept it. Feeling stuck, the detective intervened.
So, you're saying your parents provided false testimony to the police?
His words had a different weight than mine, silencing my husband.
Your mother running you over is clearly captured in the footage, acknowledged by both of your parents. But according to you, your parents are attempting to lessen their guilt by implicating you as a co-conspirator.
The gravity of the detective's words made my husband's face contort.
Do you understand? Your parents' crime becomes even more severe.
He continued, leading my husband to finally admit his guilt. In the end, I must have realized the gravity of what was happening. The confession of my husband laid bare the crimes of all three. This prompted the police officers waiting in the room to start moving hurriedly.
Regarding that,
now, a detective addressed me, questioning whether I would withdraw the complaint. The crimes committed by the three couldn't be erased, but this could significantly change their fate. However, I firmly refused.
Though I was unharmed, fleeing right after the accident is inexcusable. I will file a complaint to ensure they are held accountable for their actions.
My decision caused a great stir among the three. Lorene cried out loud, and both Larry and my husband hung their heads in shame right there. They probably hadn't expected me to make such a ruthless decision. Each of them had never doubted they were a good husband, a good Lorene, and a good Larry. It seemed they had taken my forgiveness for granted. If the family had handled the aftermath of the accident properly, I wouldn't have gone this far. But my in-laws decided to sacrifice my life to protect themselves. My husband chose to prioritize his parents' and social appearance over his wife's life. I wanted them to reflect on the severity of their actions and properly atone for their sins. Silently, I stood up and left the room. Accompanied by Bethany, I began the various procedures in another room. These were my in-laws and husband I had lived with for years. It would be a lie to say my heart wasn't aching. Above all, I was the one who was hurt the most. Even though my physical wounds had healed, this trauma would follow me for life. I hadn't done anything wrong, yet I couldn't feel completely relieved. By the time I left the police station, the day had completely darkened. Bethany, considering my feelings, invited me to a dinner party as a celebration of my discharge. Grateful for my friend's thoughtfulness, I headed to Bethany's house. Warmly welcomed by Bethany and Dawson, we enjoyed a meal together. There, I laughed for the first time in a while. Both of them, while being considerate, treated me as usual. Even though the in-laws and husband who looked down on me were gone, I was now on my own. There were still legal proceedings and many things to do. Just thinking about it made me feel disheartened. But for that moment, I forgot all about it and truly enjoyed myself. After a delightful night, I decided to divorce my husband. There was no need to torment myself any further. It seemed he had learned a little from this incident, but I realized I couldn't love him anymore. I immediately signed the divorce papers and broached the subject of divorce with my husband. He initially seemed surprised at the divorce papers, but soon consented as if he understood. Unable to bear seeing my husband's pitiful state any longer, I left everything to my lawyer thereafter. The three faced criminal charges, and in addition, were ordered to pay me compensation in the divorce proceedings. Since the fault was on my husband, I received even more compensation from the divorce. Determined to leave my in-laws' house, I rented an apartment with the compensation from the divorce proceedings. I planned to start anew far away, but I decided to stay in the city I was familiar with. The reason I didn't move far away was because Bethany's husband, Dawson, ran a company. He invited me to help out at his company. Bethany was also helping with the work, and I thought it would be good to try it together. Although I had been invited several times before, I had given up due to what my in-laws and husband might say. Honestly, with the compensation from the divorce proceedings, I didn't need to work. But Bethany and Dawson were concerned about my well-being. Suddenly being alone, they gave me a purpose in life. Having spent decades as a housewife, working with a friend was very enjoyable. I was confused by all the new experiences, but they became a significant source of fulfillment for me. Thus, I embarked on a new life, and even more encounters awaited me. I ended up remarrying a man I met through work. I had told him about the divorce, but kept silent about the compensation until we got married. Yet, he didn't blame me. "It's natural to be cautious after going through so much," he said with a smile. Past midlife, my life took a significant turn. I am probably happier and more fulfilled now than when I was younger. Despite being betrayed and hurt by those I had trusted for years, I grasped a greater happiness. Grateful to the friend and her husband who always extended their hands to me, I now step into a brighter future. I was sick in bed, which caused a huge delay in preparing for Christmas. While I was busily working, my husband Oliver had gone out somewhere. Entering Oliver's room, I noticed a bag sticking out of a drawer. I picked it up. Inside the bag was an SD card. Seeing it placed with a message card that read "For Oliver," I had a bad feeling. Just as Oliver returned home, I waited for him to take a shower and sneaked back into his room to check the contents on the computer. "What is this?" I was shocked at the footage. At the same time, anger surged through me. I'm going to divorce him. Determined, I gathered our relatives at our home the next day. "Now, please look at this." As my voice caught the attention of the relatives and Oliver towards the TV, I pressed the play button. The scene that appeared left our relatives speechless and Oliver pale. Why? To Oliver, who turned to me in disbelief, I smiled and handed him the divorce papers. "I will never forgive him, I'll make him regret this. My name is Sophia. A 34-year-old housewife. My parents passed away early, but thanks to a large inheritance and the kindness of the neighbors, I could pursue my dream job as a preschool teacher. I resigned from teaching when I was 30. To marry my childhood friend, Oliver. The catalyst for our relationship was my parents' accidental death. Being a high school student and facing college entrance exams, I didn't want to move. I was determined to attend the college my parents had supported. However, my relatives, eyeing the large inheritance left by my parents, tried to take me in. Almost strangers to me, their intentions felt creepy. Oliver, my husband-to-be, shooed these relatives away when I was vulnerable from losing my parents. Oliver, the eldest son of our neighboring family, was like an older brother to me. In front of the relatives, he declared, "We'll take care of her. We have permission from my parents, so no complaints. Sophia will be my wife in the future." Surprised by Oliver's words, who I had always seen as a brother, he turned out to be serious, confessing his feelings later. His earnest nature and the security he provided became my solace, and we started dating. Oliver always prioritized me, and eventually, I genuinely fell in love with him. When I became comfortable in my job as a preschool teacher, he proposed. I meant what I said when we were students. My feelings haven't changed. "I will make you happy, marry me." "Absolutely." Overwhelmed, I accepted his proposal with tears. Telling his parents, they rejoiced, and we celebrated that night. After marrying and 2 years of marriage, I retired to become a housewife. Oliver had requested me to become a housewife, something that triggered this change. Though it was sad to leave my dream job, I decided to focus on having children and use my experience in parenting. Oliver has a younger sister. Emma, my sister-in-law, was my classmate since kindergarten. She was also my best friend and colleague at the childcare center. Emma had mixed feelings about me marrying Oliver. That is because she and Oliver don't get along. Oliver has always been kind to you, but unreasonable to me. Really? Absolutely. I often listened without arguing, as Emma insisted. According to Emma, she was delighted to have me as a relative. But not as Oliver's wife. Pretending to lament, she often complained about marrying her disliked brother. From my perspective, though Oliver might be somewhat cold to Emma, it was clear they were still connected by blood. However, Emma didn't seem to think so, often showing dissatisfaction when I suggested this. "Sophia, you say that because you don't know Oliver's true face." "I wonder." I always responded, doubting Emma's claims. Looking back, I regret not paying more attention, but at that time, I thought it was just sibling dynamics. But even after 5 years of marriage, we didn't have any children. Then, I noticed a gradual change in Oliver's attitude. At first, he complained about our housework being split equally since I became a housewife, and soon, I was doing 90% of it. Without kids and just relaxing at home all day, you could at least do a bit more housework, right? These unkind words, something the old Oliver would never say, hurt me, but I accepted them as my duty as a housewife. From there, Oliver started to push more household responsibilities on me, citing my role as a housewife. One day, while visiting my in-laws, Oliver suddenly started belittling me, laughing. "Sophia's cooking is just awful. And her cleaning is so sloppy, can't she do something about it?" The living room fell silent, but Oliver didn't notice. In fact, he began to mock me even more. "The laundry is also carelessly done, she hardly works at all for a housewife." I could feel Emma getting irritated beside me. Isabella, my mother-in-law, smiled, but her eyes weren't laughing. I had to say something. "I might be a bit absent-minded at times, so maybe Oliver finds me lacking in some ways. But there's a way to say things." Emma glared at Oliver as she spoke. Oliver glared back, and the living room atmosphere turned tense. Then Lucas, as my father-in-law, began to speak calmly. "A husband should help with his wife's shortcomings. Besides, Sophia always helps us out a lot." Oliver, discontented, kept quiet at Lucas's words. Emma was still angry, but Isabella calmed her down. The mood was ruined because of Oliver's words. I tried to lighten the mood, clapping my hands and smiling. "Hey! I made a cake, would you like to have some? Sophia's cakes are delicious. I'm so happy, let's eat." Emma's mood brightened instantly, and I felt relieved. Then Isabella, Emma, and I moved to the kitchen. "Sorry about Oliver earlier. We know how hard you always work, Sophia. Don't push yourself too much." "Isabella, thank you." Isabella's kind words almost brought me to tears. Returning to the living room, Oliver sat turned away, looking more upset than before. "I brought the cake." "I don't want it." "But it's your favorite pumpkin cake." "I said I don't want it." As Oliver yelled, the plate with the cake disappeared from my hands. Looking down, the smashed cake was stuck to the floor. "Oliver! Apologize to Sophia! It's her fault for forcing it on me." Oliver, though looking confused, refused to apologize to me. I was a little saddened. He used to apologize immediately in the past. "That's awful. Sophia, you should divorce him." "What? Don't be ridiculous. It's not your decision to make." Emma and Oliver started bickering, ignoring me, and their argument heated up. "Unlovable women can't get married. When I get married is none of your business." I desperately tried to calm down the shouting Emma. Oliver, looking at us in disdain, laughed and left, saying he was going out for a drink. "Oliver's been going out a lot lately. Yeah, he never tells me where he's going." "Don't worry too much, I'll ask around too." I thanked the ever-kind Isabella. My in-laws always doted on me, treating me like their own daughter. They scolded me when I was wrong, feeling like a second set of parents. Part of the reason I married Oliver was because of my relationship with my in-laws. The thought of becoming a family with my beloved in-laws and Emma made me happy. But it was true that I still loved Oliver. However, since then, Oliver's treatment of me became increasingly harsh. "I'm going out." "Again? Where have you been going every weekend recently?" "Anywhere I want." After a while, Oliver started going out somewhere every weekend. sometimes even staying overnight, but he stubbornly refused to tell me where. Moreover, he was always angry, and our usual conversations diminished. I once asked if I had done something wrong, but I never got a satisfying answer. Amidst this, as Christmas approached, I fell ill. Isabella came to help at our house. It took about a week to fully recover, and I had to start preparing for Christmas slowly, dragging my heavy body around, since Oliver wouldn't help. I was sick in bed, which caused a huge delay in preparing for Christmas. While I was busily working, Oliver had gone out somewhere. Entering Oliver's room, I noticed a bag sticking out of a drawer. I picked it up. Inside the bag was an SD card. Seeing it with a message card that read "For Oliver," I had a bad feeling. Just as Oliver returned home, I waited for him to take a shower and sneaked back into his room to check the contents on the computer.
What is this?
I was speechless at the footage. At the same time, anger surged through me. I'm going to divorce him. Determined, I gathered our relatives at our in-laws' house the next day.
Now, please look at this.
As my voice directed the relatives and Oliver towards the TV, I pressed the play button. The scene that appeared left our relatives speechless, and Oliver turned pale. Why? As Oliver looked at me in disbelief, I smiled and handed him the divorce papers. I will never forgive him, I'll make him regret this. Seeing the divorce papers, Oliver's face turned even bluer.
Wait, hold on. Divorce is too sudden.
What are you talking about? After seeing that video, there's no other option but divorce. Oliver felt silent at my words. The content of the SD card was a childbirth scene. Of course, it wasn't mine. A young woman was struggling through labor. At first, I wondered why such a thing existed, but then I recognized the man beside the woman. It was unmistakably Oliver, stroking the woman's head and encouraging her.
Keep going!
I couldn't mistake Oliver's voice, having known him since childhood.
This is... I was just standing in, it's not what you think.
Don't lie to me. I turned up the volume on the TV. Then a conversation between the woman and Oliver filled the living room.
Evelyn! It's almost time! Our child is about to be born! Oliver, yes, I'll keep going!
After their conversation, a baby's cry could be heard. Then Oliver kissed the woman named Evelyn, thanking her repeatedly.
You did great! You worked so hard!
I did it for you, my love. I love you too. Oh, Evelyn. I can't wait to live with you and our child. Me either. After saying that and kissing again, the video stopped. The relatives in the living room were stunned, and my in-laws and Emma were visibly trembling with anger.
Well, after watching this, no one would believe he was just standing in as a proxy. This is... I just got carried away, it was just an act of a father.
Lucas is usually a calm person, suddenly stepped forward and slapped Oliver. Oliver held his cheek in shock. Lucas was a gentleman who only got angry when necessary, and had never resorted to physical action. Everyone was surprised by this.
Do you understand what you're saying? Don't you feel sorry for Sophia? But this is...
Even then, Oliver tried desperately to explain himself. Emma spoke up in a calm voice.
I've always disliked you, but I thought I could maintain our relationship if you cherished my best friend. But someone who hurts my important friend can't be considered family.
I'm cutting ties with you. At Emma's words, Oliver's face turned red with anger.
You, a younger sister, are so presumptuous. If you want to cut ties, go ahead. It's a relief.
Then I'll cut ties too.
Eh?
Oliver froze at Isabella's words, said with a smile. He tries to hide it, but Oliver is quite the mama's boy. I like Isabella too, so it never really bothered me, but to be honest, I didn't really like how he clung to her, even nearing 40. Oliver seemed bewildered by Isabella's declaration of cutting ties.
But I'm the eldest son, right? Mom, you're joking about cutting ties, right?
Do you think I'm someone who would joke in this situation?
No.
Isabella never lost her smile. That made it even scarier, and the whispering relatives straightened up and began listening quietly to her. Isabella continued in a calm and steady voice. Don't worry about us. After all, we have Sophia. If she remarries someone wonderful and has children, they will be our grandchildren.
What? If she divorces, she's a stranger, right?
Not just Isabella, but Lucas, Emma, and I all sighed heavily at Oliver's response. In fact, after marrying, I had been legally adopted by my in-laws. It wasn't necessary, but my own relatives, eyeing my parents' inheritance, often pressured me into an adoption agreement. Your parents' inheritance is yours to use as you wish. But to protect you from those relatives, why don't you consider being legally adopted by us? After my parents passed away, my in-laws never asked me for money. I had prepared tuition and living expenses from my inheritance and gave the living expenses to my in-laws. However, they didn't touch it, saying it was important money, and when I got a job, they even added a celebration gift and returned it to me. I initially refused, but they insisted, so I gratefully accepted. Because of this history, I trusted Isabella's words. That's why I consulted with Oliver and got legally adopted right after our marriage. It seemed Oliver had completely forgotten about it.
No, but even if I was adopted, I'm the eldest son, the real child. That's right. I have a child. This house is mine.
Oliver, as if he had remembered something important, was met with laughter from Isabella. What are you talking about? As of today, you are no longer my child. Well, legally you'll still be my child, but we'll have to renounce your inheritance. Oliver was speechless at the decisive words. Tears streamed down his face from the rejection of his beloved Isabella. I added to Oliver's misery. By the way, do you know why I called everyone here today? Oliver looked at me, puzzled. His tear-stained face was dirty. I felt a bit pathetic for having loved such a pitiful man. Christmas was always celebrated at my in-laws' house. They were landowners in the area, with many relatives nearby. There was no other place that could accommodate our large family of nearly 50 people. But this time, we limited the number of people, having only families with children come from the relative side. So, there were only about 20 people in the living room, half of the usual number. It seemed Oliver hadn't even noticed that. After I pointed it out, he finally realized.
There are no children? But I hear crying. Are they in another room?
Oh, actually, we have a guest today. Please, come in. At my words, Emma stood up and opened the door at the back. There stood Evelyn, confidently with a baby in her arms. Evelyn stood there, holding the baby. Her demeanor saying she belonged and was welcomed.
Nice to meet you, Isabella. I'm Evelyn. This is Liam, our son, the fruit of my love with Oliver.
Evelyn said this cheerfully, but Isabella frowned. Though behind a door, she must have heard the conversation. But then I noticed the earphones in Evelyn's hands.
Were you listening to music in the next room?
Yeah, I was bored. Evelyn's attitude towards Isabella was starkly indifferent. She acted as if she was the rightful wife, and I was irritated, but realized she would soon be.
Do you know why you were invited today? Isn't it because you're getting a divorce? And then I'll be Oliver's wife. We have Liam too, so it's a celebration, right?
Her naive thinking made me sigh. In this atmosphere, thinking it's a celebration is just unbelievable. Oliver was frozen by the suddenness of it all, but seeing Evelyn's cluelessness seemed to bring him back to reality. Evelyn, we're in the middle of a difficult conversation. I'll contact you later, just wait a little longer.
I can't wait anymore. Write the divorce papers now.
Evelyn said this, handing a pen to Oliver. Then she looked at me, smirking in a mocking way.
Sophia, was it?
Thank you for your service until today. From now on, I will be the one receiving Oliver's love. Even with her triumphant tone, I just found it outright creepy. Since I saw that video of the childbirth scene, my love for Oliver is completely lost. I don't need his love, even if he begged me to take it. But to Evelyn, it seemed like I was regretful. Sorry about that. Oliver says I have firmer skin and am prettier to hold than you. He said you're like a skinny chicken. Evelyn laughed dismissively, with Oliver awkwardly trying to stop her. The onlookers' eyes were cold towards the two of them. I decided to respond with a smile and addressed Evelyn's comment. No, thank you for keeping him company. I don't need him anymore, so please take him. Evelyn's eyebrows twitched slightly at my words. She seemed about to say something, but I ignored her and continued. Well, you're getting a man who's about to be disowned, lose his house and job, and become poor. Evelyn's face clouded over. She probably thought that after Oliver and I divorced, she would stay in this house. While thinking how she would have known otherwise if she had listened earlier, I continued to smile at Evelyn. Oliver, wait. Sophia's the one leaving, right? This is Oliver's house, right? I'm becoming your wife, right? You said I could be the housewife. Evelyn confronted Oliver. Oliver looked uncomfortable and avoided her gaze. Oliver, look at me. What are we going to do? I quit my job, remember? You said Liam could stay with Isabella and we'd live in luxury. Evelyn started to freak out, scratching her hair. Startled by her shouting, Liam also began to cry, his cries echoing in the living room. I reluctantly took Liam from Evelyn and held him. He must be about 4 months old, just starting to hold his head up, and he was very cute. When I gently rocked him, he calmed down and fell asleep again. Relieved, I noticed Evelyn glaring at me. Give him back! That's my and Oliver's child. The grandchild of this house. He just fell asleep, so please don't raise your voice. While I was speaking, Evelyn snatched Liam back from me and returned him to the baby carrier. Liam woke up for a moment, but fell asleep again as Evelyn rocked him. I looked at her, relieved. Evelyn was glaring at me as if I were her sworn enemy. You think you can just take Liam away? You're useless. A woman who can't get pregnant should leave this house. At Evelyn's words, I realized Oliver hadn't told her about that incident. It was about why I quit my job as a preschool teacher. Evelyn, didn't Oliver tell you why we didn't have children? I don't know. Isn't it because you're not loved? Evelyn said this, looking triumphant. As if she was superior as a woman. But that didn't matter to me. Oliver was pale-faced in the background, but I continued, revealing the truth. Oliver, I've always been unable to have children. Evelyn's momentum stopped abruptly, as if it were a lie. The surrounding relatives were also stunned. Actually, I quit my job after having a miscarriage. I wanted children so badly, I went for a checkup for the first time when I tried to conceive. Oliver also had tests done with me. The results showed no issues with me, but Oliver had a condition making it difficult for him to have children. It wasn't impossible, but a natural conception was highly unlikely. The pregnancy we had was a miracle, but it ended due to genetic issues. I was sad, but wanted to try again. Oliver felt the same, so we started fertility treatments. Fortunately, there was still plenty of inheritance left, so I quit my job on Oliver's suggestion, to focus on my health. However, we saw no success with the treatments, and when we started considering adoption, Oliver became reluctant. Looking back, he probably started his affair during our treatments, and Evelyn's pregnancy came to light around the time we talked about adoption. Evelyn turned pale upon hearing this and looked at Oliver. So, Evelyn, is Liam really Oliver's child? It's not impossible, right? Our love. Her talking about love at this point was just absurd. I smiled and said again. That's why I said, natural conception is almost impossible. But. Evelyn was flustered, trying to make excuses. Emma cut her off. Stop lying. You're my friend's wife, right? What? Oliver looked at Emma, wide-eyed. Emma nodded at me and showed Evelyn her mobile phone screen. It showed Evelyn and Liam, a man, and a 4-year-old girl I didn't know. I had contacted Emma after watching the video the day before. Emma recognized Evelyn from the photo on SNS, belonging to a man she knew. I knew it was Evelyn by her name and face. We work at the same place and talk often. "You're married?" Oliver asked, but Evelyn didn't answer. Her expression confirmed Emma's words were true. It was a shotgun wedding, right? No talk of divorce, and this photo says Liam is that man's child. No. True love, huh? Pretending your husband's child is another man's, to switch to a richer man. Is it the money you love? Emma looked down on Evelyn with disdain. Evelyn, red-faced and shaking, didn't know how to respond and just looked down. "By the way, I've called that man, he'll be here soon." "No! It was just a moment of weakness. Please don't tell my husband." "It's too late for that." At Emma's words, the doorbell rang, and Evelyn collapsed in despair. A relative opened the door, and Evelyn's husband, Henry, came in. He saw Evelyn and immediately shouted in anger. "You've been cheating on me? What were you thinking? It's not like that. It's a misunderstanding. I heard everything on the phone." Realizing there was no escape, Evelyn froze in tears. Henry took Liam from her and stood up. Then apologized to us. "My wife has caused you a lot of trouble. We will divorce." "Wait, I don't want a divorce." Henry looked down on Evelyn coldly. "You promised to stop after the affair 3 years ago. And you continued. I'll raise the child. You won't see him again." We were shocked by Henry's words. I couldn't believe that even though he had noticed it once, he continued to do it behind the scenes. Such audacity to claim a momentary lapse. 3 years ago, huh? "No, Sophia, it's not like that." "What's different? Going around marking your territory elsewhere?" At my words, Oliver just trembled, barely moving his mouth. I'm not usually one to get angry. But Emma once told me it's scary when I do. I'd hardly ever been angry with Oliver, so he seemed surprised by my attitude. "I'm disappointed in you. I can't believe you've been betraying your family for so long. I tried to get you and Emma to reconcile, but it looks like I was the one who couldn't see clearly." Emma nodded as if to say, "Finally you understand." Oliver was stunned by my straightforwardness. "I'll be asking for compensation. And of course, child support." "Eh?" I touched my stomach. I had been keeping it a secret, except from Emma, planning to announce it at Christmas. I was pregnant. The reason I'd been feeling unwell recently was morning sickness. After entering the stable period, I planned to surprise my parents and Oliver. The artificial insemination worked. "It's truly your child." I kept quiet because I didn't want to get your hopes up and then disappoint you. So. Oliver collapsed, overwhelmed by my words. Evelyn, too, seemed drained of all energy to argue after hearing about my pregnancy and her own impending divorce. "Then, please fill out the divorce papers." I said this and handed Oliver a pen. Then I left the house first with Emma. By now, Oliver must be getting glared at by the in-laws while filling out the divorce papers. Feeling refreshed after saying everything I wanted, I enjoyed a leisurely tea party with Emma. Later, Oliver and I finalized our divorce. Since his job was with a family company, he was fired due to this incident and ended up penniless and out of the house. Evelyn got divorced too and initially demanded money from Oliver. But seeing his situation, she quickly disappeared. In the end, Oliver had been working in a rundown snack bar to pay for the alimony and child support, but rumors have it that he was caught by some bad customers and taken away. I know about this because Emma, laughing about the fleeting nature of true love, told me. It was information from Henry, Evelyn's ex-husband. Lately, he's been going out more with his children, and it seems that Oliver's story comes up in their conversations. Henry, in fact, was the one Emma had a crush on during her student days. Though he reciprocated her feelings, he married Evelyn when she got pregnant. Emma denies it, but her blushing suggests that maybe, just maybe, spring is near for her. After Oliver left, my in-laws were initially down, but they recovered while I was busy with pregnancy preparations. Now they dote on their grandchild, becoming loving grandparents. At first, they were hesitant, feeling guilty towards me, but eventually, they began treating me like their real daughter again. Living together since birth, Emma jokes about how it's hard to tell who is the real daughter now. As for me, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl without any trouble. She's a very cute girl. I hope she grows up to be bright and cheerful like Emma. My friend and now sister, who I admire. Sophia. She won't stop crying.
Okay, I'm coming.
I hear my daughter's cries and Emma's troubled voice from the living room. Smiling, I responded and left the balcony. Outside, the sky is clear and cloudless. A future full of promises awaits us. Just like this bright blue sky.